In this tale, a courageous and ambitious knight is fated to perish on the battlefield. He once believed that someone like him, whose talents awakened, flourished, and took root in war, could begin anew. In this envisioned life, he dreamed of finally building a family, a deep longing he held. Yet, tragically, everything unfolded differently for him. Is it merely a pipe dream? The knight kneeling before us is none other than the renowned Arik from the Drenic Empire, the protagonist of our tale. His ultimate adversary is also a formidable knight, known as Duke Theron, one of the 6 Hexa-class knights of the Althan Empire. Even Arik understands the gravity of the challenge ahead, particularly since he has already endured the overwhelming pressure. In the midst of the Black Wave, Duke Theron, after merely a day on the battlefield, is intrigued that Argri still resists him, even knowing he faces one of the 6 Hexa-class knights. He reflects that it would be a pity to extinguish a rising talent like our hero. Yet Argri refuses to yield. With unwavering defiance, he rises to his feet and fiercely swings his sword. It is made clear that he was born on the battlefield, and it is there he will meet his end. The two opponents start moving toward each other, their overwhelming presence plunging the surroundings into turmoil. Duke Thermion observes that, despite Ari's bravery, a trace of regret remains in his eyes. The Duke goes on to reflect on what Ari could have become. He became a formidable future adversary for him, yet he charged his sword with energy, rushing directly at our hero. Expressing hope that with a new life, he could finally release his regrets, the Duke swung his sword. However, before Argus met his end, he recounted the prolonged conflict between the Drenic Empire and the Althon Empire, which had endured for many years, mentioning his mother. A casualty of this war, he was merely an infant when his mother perished amidst the surrounding turmoil, leaving him orphaned and alone in a chaotic world. While other children played with toys and read books, he struggled to contribute to the war, fighting for his kingdom. At the age of 14, he was compelled to take up the sword and was sent to his first battlefield. He fought valiantly, and it was. At this moment, his talents awakened, igniting a fervor in his heart that amplified his movements and senses to an unimaginable level. Rising swiftly through the ranks of the knights, he astonished everyone by mastering 3 mana cores and advancing to a quad core with 4 cores. His dream of joining the elite 5 Hexa-class knights of the Empire was now within reach, a goal he finally approached. Seizing the opportunity he had long yearned for, he believed this final war might grant him peace from his exhausting life. Thus, he fought his last battle courageously, knowing he was on the verge of fulfilling his deepest desires, until Duke Theron appeared. His mere presence caused everyone to flee. In the present, that first strike, Duke shatters Arik's sword into fragments, and his dream crumbles instantly before his eyes. The Duke's next strike pierces his heart as he reflects on his desire to build a family, now lost. The stab wound hurls him across the battlefield, slamming him hard onto the ground. The impact fractures the earth beneath him as he slides, leaving him bloodied and broken. As he starts fading into unconsciousness, everything turns pitch black. However, the darkness dissipates the instant he opens his eyes. The first sight he encounters is a husband and wife attempting to play with him, or rather, with their child. Argit swiftly begins to lose his. Upon hearing them refer to him as their child, his father promptly lifts him up, beaming with a smile on his face. He addresses him as DNE, urging him to become a fantastic spearman and follow his father's footsteps. His mother, Lily, swiftly pulls him from her husband's arms, insisting he'll become a great assassin. The husband, Arkins, and his wife argue over their son's future career, while Arger feels timid and uneasy. Perplexed by their ongoing argument, they seem to be in a carriage heading home, debating the same issue throughout their journey. Lily thinks stealthily moving through the dark to eliminate targets and escaping unnoticed is a far more impressive approach, while her father maintains that the spear represents the most elegant and comprehensive form of martial art. That's how it unfolds for our hero. Just as he believed he was finished in the battlefield, he miraculously reincarnates. The twist in his tale is that he awakens in the Althan Empire, his former enemy, as the youngest son of a count. When the carriage halts upon entering the mansion grounds, his parents reach a compromise and resolve to educate him. Lily and Aaron possess differing skills, yet Lily persists, annoyingly asserting that their son will become an assassin, while Aaron dismisses it with laughter, insisting DNE will be a spearman. The carriage driver shakes his head, signaling their arrival. Both parents are slightly confused, realizing they've already reached their destination. It seems they lost track of time while arguing with each other. The husband swiftly exits the carriage and chooses to assist his wife in getting down. He offers her his hand, but she hesitates, feeling slightly self-conscious, and questions what the castle's residents might think if they see them. He chuckles in response, explaining that he simply wishes to hold his wife's hand, so why should it matter? With that, he guides his lovely wife out of the carriage, while Arger can't help but feel it was awkward seeing his father behave so strangely, but his discomfort gradually faded as his eyes widened, captivated by the castle's grandeur upon entering. Lily couldn't help but notice how genuinely happy DNE seemed to be back home. With a house like this and such wealthy parents, it's no wonder. Perhaps his talents would find it easier to flourish here. Have you ever imagined this possible? 2 months have passed since that day, and now Lily is chatting with her son, who has begun to babble. She's overjoyed that he's finally producing sounds, while our boy is equally captivated to witness this babbling firsthand, something he never had the chance to hear before. You see, opportunities to interact with young children were rare during his time spent wandering the battlefield. The few children he encountered were often bandaged and weeping, with nowhere to turn, many grieving parents who gradually succumbed to ruin and vanished. In comparison, his new home feels fortunate and prosperous, and he's relieved he won't face starvation here. Suddenly, the father bursts into the room, stepping in eagerly with a spear in hand. Proudly declaring this as a spear, it appears our boy is far from fond of his father's exuberant side. He struggles to accept that this man, who hardly resembles a war hero, is indeed his father, Arenas, the Empire's mightiest hexaclass spearman. Despite his unassuming appearance, he was a false war hero, famously known as the Blue Whirlwind. The wife becomes irritated and starts pushing him away from the child, questioning how he could enter the kid's room with such a sharp object. The man begins to lose composure under her intense stare, and meekly explains he only wanted to show it to DNE. However, her menacing tone reminds him that she had already stated they wouldn't teach their son anything until he reached the right age. It's unsurprising that this grown man trembles under her piercing gaze, as his wife is the Empire's most skilled assassin. Meanwhile, she insists that if he continues, she'll teach their son the basics of stealth at a young age. He counters, arguing that early education is common nowadays, even in renowned magical institutions like House. Teleport places a staff beside a child the moment they're born, but his wife grows irritated once more, questioning if the spear resembles a staff to him. Meanwhile, the boy reflects, explaining that his parents' intense focus on his future stems from his two older sisters pursuing careers unrelated to spear fighting or assassination. As noon arrives, we observe his two sisters playfully tease their younger brother, making his cheeks appear sore. Arabella, one of his sisters, laughed and remarked that he looked even cuter with his cheeks puffed up. Meanwhile, the boy narrates about Arabella, revealing that her talent in magic led her to pursue the path of a mage from a young age. By the age of 12, she had already become a 3-chain class mage. Since the highest mage class is 9 chains, it signifies her genius, having surpassed the entry level. Arabella then asks her younger brother if he'd like to learn magic with her later, mentioning she's grown bored of studying alone daily and would gladly teach him a thing or two. While Arabella radiates energy, her sister Claire is entirely the opposite. Nervous yet composed, she hesitantly offers to teach him summoning, describing it as a useful skill to keep handy. Like Arabella, CLA is exceptionally skilled in summoning. She mastered her first summon at just 7 years old, and now manages 2 summons simultaneously. Arabella teases, urging Claire to touch him, claiming he's too soft. However, CLA appears cautious and uncertain. She hesitates, unsure whether to touch him, while Danny acts sweet and friendly, recalling how he initially thought CLA didn't like him. Now he realizes it's more about her feeling jealous, as he's the youngest in the family, stealing all the attention. Finally, CLA reaches out and softly touches his nose, overjoyed, exclaiming how soft it is. Indeed, she touches him once more and vows to teach him everything once he matures. Danny can't help but feel somewhat overwhelmed by how everyone is eager to impart their unique skills to him. His father is a hexaclass spearman, his mother, though retired, is a skilled assassin, and his eldest sister is a prodigious mage. Then there's Claire, another genius, but in summoning. The household is a gathering of exceptional talents, each aiming to shape him in their own way. Count Srees embodies the perfect noble family, the ideal he always envisioned. He questions the purpose of seeking revenge in this new life. False, his death was unfortunate, but it occurred on a battlefield. It seems almost absurd to seek retribution against someone who defeated him fairly. The entire family convenes in the hall, engaged in heated debates, each trying to persuade the others. Observing the heartwarming interactions among his family brings a smile to Danny's face, as this is the kind of family he has always wished for, and he is grateful to have been born into it. However, when tensions rise and arguments erupt, he begins to question whether this truly represents a harmonious family. The narrative then shifts to explore how their specialties might align better with DNE. A unique ceremony takes place in the House of Srees, known as the Choosing Ceremony. When a child is born into the family and reaches the age of 1, various objects are placed on a table in front of them. People then attempt to predict the child's future based on the object they choose. As a year has passed, today is young Master Dan's turn, having just turned 1. As the assembled guests converse, they remark on the young lady's dual achievement as both a mage and a summoner, speculating on what young Master DNE will choose. Eager to discover his decision, they head to the ceremony hall. Once gathered in the grand hall, they observe DNE seated near 4 distinct items, each representing a unique path. As the crowd gathers around the table where Dani is seated, his mother tells him to simply choose the one he likes. However, Dan appears uncertain about his decision. He glances at his father, who is eagerly anticipating his choice of the spear. His father smirks, convinced that young Dana will likely be drawn to the dragon tail spear. The spearhead is crafted from rare Dukan material, and when infused with mana, its sharpness and weight align with the user's intent. Meanwhile, his mother feels joy and pride, believing DNE is too handsome to become an assassin. Yet, she's certain he'll ultimately choose the dagger. This isn't an ordinary blade, it's known as Kunth Horn, forged from Isle, a pouch capable of containing all the world's elements and storing various poisons, much like their parents. Dan's sister is certain he will become a great mage, and believes he will choose the pouch to preserve the mage's legacy. This bag is also a unique subspace pouch, an item usable only by mages or those with magical talent. Meanwhile, Claire, with her typical hesitant expression, questions whether Danny can summon the item before him. A summon sign, a tool used by summoners. This sign grants them a code based on their talent, enabling them to call upon their summons. However, Dan feels deeply confused and uncertain, as he can literally hear his family members' thoughts. Eventually, he sighs and proceeds. In his final decision, he starts crawling toward the items, and the crowd's excitement rises in anticipation as he picks up speed. His parents and siblings are overjoyed to see him moving, cheering him on in their own ways. His father urges him to choose something sturdy, while his mother encourages him to pick something short and sharp. As he gets closer, a yellow light begins to. The shimmer emanating from all the items on the table leaves Danny utterly bewildered, and his family shares the same confusion. Meanwhile, the crowd beams with excitement, their expressions a mix of shock and awe as they witness all 4 items reacting simultaneously, an unprecedented event. They can't help but acknowledge that the young master appears to be a once-in-a-generation genius. DNE is equally perplexed by the situation. He remembers being a skilled soldier on the battlefield, yet in this life he feels entirely out of his depth. Little Arabella, full of curiosity, asks her father what they should do, as this has never occurred before. Both her father and mother appear just as confused, understanding that this implies they must now teach him all 4. The elements of the course surprise the other 2 women, while Dan simply responds with a hearty smile. As time progresses, we find ourselves in the training hall, where the sounds of clashing weapons echo. It turns out to be none other than Dine and his father. From the looks of it, our young protagonist has significantly grown since we last saw him, which, if I'm not mistaken, was merely 30 seconds ago. Arkin flashes a broad smile. The father smiles at his son for his excellent results, as DNE has masterfully refined the technique he taught him earlier. The boy thanks his father, and it's revealed that DNE has now turned 7 as they share a joyful laugh. Suddenly, a man appears on the scene. Dana gazes at him curiously, and it's clear the man is holding a spear. It seems Arin was anticipating the spear's arrival, as he quickly takes hold of it. He presents it to DNE, explaining it's his birthday gift. Aaron mentions he initially planned to give it during the birthday banquet, but decided to offer it before his mother's gift. He adds that he spent 2 years preparing the spear, custom-made by a renowned craftsman in the capital, and concludes by wishing him a happy birthday. An early happy 7th birthday, and our boy eagerly drops his old stick, grabbing the spear from his father. He declares he'll use it because it's just so cool. He's really impressed by how the black handle and silver spearhead look together, and it's surprisingly light, too. His father asks if he likes it, and he responds that he loves it. In fact, he's so thrilled that he begins fidgeting with it excitedly. His father then inquires if he understands the distinction between a sword and a spear. Dan elaborates that the spear's length allows for keeping opponents at bay effectively, and its small contact point enhances attack efficiency. His father concurs, acknowledging the truth in this, but cautions that as Dan grows stronger, the spear will become more challenging to wield compared to a sword. He emphasizes this point. The core problem with spears is the need for a minimum distance to attack. But the father advises not to overthink it, as every weapon has its strengths and weaknesses. He explains that even swords, often deemed the perfect weapon, can falter in specific scenarios. The son brightens at this, promising to remember it. The father then begins spinning the spear. With the spear in hand, he invites his son to spar, aiming to demonstrate something. Dane is utterly stunned by the immense power radiating from his father. For the first time, he witnesses the extraordinary energy flow of a Hexa-class Spearman, and the magical force his father emits is overwhelming. After charging up, the father swiftly thrusts the spear forward, distorting the surrounding space. The tip begins to distort, he explains, due to releasing his magic power during the spear thrust. This technique leverages the core's trait of concentrating magic in one spot. He mentions learning about this from his sister, noting that as the number of cores increases, humans can surpass their physical limits, enhancing their capabilities. Limits can be surpassed. He reflects on how, in his past, he had a quad core, and all his current knowledge stems from his previous life. Meanwhile, his father smiles broadly, thinking of how well his son has studied, and reminds him he now has 6 mana orbs. Of course, the boy feigns shock, but inwardly, he ponders how he could have achieved 6 if he hadn't died. Dana's father then encourages him to try out his new spear. Though hesitant, Dan is urged to relax, clear his mind, and thrust the spear. Agreeing, Dan holds the spear and reflects on his past. In his previous life, he had little interest in spears, having focused on swordsmanship after discovering his talent. Spears had only ever been a secondary choice for him. Now the moment has come for him to attempt it. After positioning himself, he shuts his eyes and his father observes, noting his solid posture. A broad smile spreads across his face, as it took him 7 years to perfect this skill. Yet, seeing his son's age, he doubts whether he can succeed. However, the instant DNE thrusts the spear, reality is utterly shattered. Defying his father's expectations, he genuinely hadn't anticipated this miracle to occur. He panics and starts shouting, questioning how his son knows so much. Once DNE completes the technique, the man approaches his son, laughing and praising him for an impressive job. Dan explains that the moment he thrust the spear, he concentrated magical energy into one point and infused it into the weapon. When the magical energy reached the spearhead, he severed its flow. Upon hearing this, the father becomes furious and inquires if he has formed a mana core. Dan responds affirmatively, explaining that while reading a book on mana core creation, he decided to attempt it and fortunately succeeded. However, he is lying, as the truth is that he formed it during mana practice. Kneeling down to meet his son's eye level, the father breathes deeply, unable to suppress his pride. He's certain that one day his son will grow into an exceptional warrior. Dane simply smiles, his mind brimming with thoughts of the future surprises he has planned, ones that will surely astound his father. Meanwhile, the father ponders whether his son will truly become a mage, a spearman, or, as night descends, an assassin and a summoner unite, marking the beginning of Dan's 7th birthday. Guests assemble in the castle, the hall alive with music and joyous laughter, all reveling in the moment. Among them is Duke, the very man who, in a past life, took the life of Arin. Spotting Arin, Duke beckons him over to reconnect. He addresses him as Duke, but Bout insists on dropping the formalities and speaking as they normally do. Being from the greatest house of the Althan Empire and head of the Thermian Duchy, Bout holds significant status. Arin quickly approaches his friend and whispers that many are watching, so he must maintain the formal act. The Duke tells him to do as he wishes and proceeds with his inquiry. When his son arrives, Arin calls out to Dane, instructing him to greet Duke Thuran promptly. At the mention of Duke Thurian, Dane's mind instantly recalls his last encounter with the man. Once the boy stands before the Duke, he introduces himself as Dane Srez, bowing his head and expressing his honor to meet him. The Duke laughs, clearly impressed. The child's manners prompt his father to ask if DNE is also learning to use a spear. Arin responds that he is. At that moment, a young lady approaches Duke Bo from behind. When DNE's eyes meet hers, he is momentarily startled. The girl greets Count Sras politely, bowing her head to display proper etiquette. She introduces herself as Lila Thuran, the youngest daughter of the Therian Duke. After this introduction, the celebration proceeded. The guests relished the music and the splendid evening. However, the same could not be said for Arkins, Sries, and Bout Thermain, as Baroness Thermain remained unwell. Despite Bout's relentless attempts to find a cure or solution, nothing proved effective. Arkin clung to the hope that this was merely a temporary challenge and that his friend's wife would soon recover. Things improved soon, but Bout still warned him that if he vanished suddenly, it would mean his wife's condition had worsened, and he'd used a teleportation scroll to return to the capital. Regardless, today was a party for DNE, who had just disappeared somewhere. Bout seemed like a clever child, and he wanted to chat with him a bit more. Arin didn't know his son's whereabouts either, and noticed that Miss Lila had. His disappearance made finding them surprisingly simple. The two went on a walk together, likely unimpressed by this dull party, much like many others. What they discussed, however, remained a mystery to their parents. In private, Lila was quite chatty, and truthfully, she disliked accompanying her father to these aristocratic gatherings. This time, though, she was pleased she had come. Leah had overheard. Much was said about DNE's handsomeness, but now he appeared even more striking in the moonlight. She admired this place, and Dan was pleased to hear she enjoyed it. Unlike the capital, the Sraz family's territory was peaceful and serene, which was why Ila envied him. At her home, there was constant activity. Nobles visited daily with business or offers for her father, sometimes even at night. The imperial family arrives, and the most irritating part is that she must dress formally and step out to welcome them each time, something she absolutely despises. Rather than endure this, she prefers wearing practical, simple attire and spending her day practicing with her sword. DNE was taken aback that such a seemingly delicate and harmless girl was engaged in sword training instead. Magic himself cherished his serene domain. It wasn't as bustling as the capital, granting him ample time to hone his spear skills, which he adored. Initially, Lila was taken aback by his choice of weapon, but then she recalled his father's epithet, and it all made sense. She had often heard her father praise the legendary blue whirlwind, and now she understood. Dane is training intensely with the spear, which implies he aims to join the academy. However, that wasn't his actual reason for practicing. Lila was taken aback by this response. For her, training hard to enter the academy seemed like the clear choice. She had heard that merely gaining admission was extremely challenging. Yet Dan didn't seem to question his ability to get in, and his practice had a different purpose altogether. Desiring to improve further upon joining the academy, Lila was struck by his confidence and questioned what he would do if he failed to gain entry. Even in that scenario, he resolved not to be disheartened or quit. He would simply try again. And if a second attempt also proved unsuccessful, he would accept it as a sign that this path wasn't meant for him. Lila was left in disbelief. She doubted his relaxed outlook on the future, questioning if he feared disrupting his family and home. Naturally, he wasn't worried, as it paled in comparison to his past struggles. Layla, however, envied him. Her family viewed failure as intolerable. Despite DNE spending 7 years among nobility, he remained astonished by petty nobles were preoccupied with such concerns, but for Lila he harbored no doubts about her success. Upon hearing the encouraging words, she brightened up and eagerly offered Dani a chance to observe her swordsmanship. Our hero was slightly taken aback by her enthusiasm, yet it was impossible to deter her when the prospect of practicing with a sword arose. Lila immediately seized the opportunity. She inquired about the location of the training ground, and DNE had to accompany her, hoping nothing would occur there. On the training ground, Lila did not hold back, executing move after move like an experienced swordsman. To a beginner's eye, her movements might have appeared flawless, but our hero was far from a novice. Observing her, he acknowledged the precision in her transition from attack to defense. The defense and backflow were executed very smoothly, and the timing of her attacks was excellent. However, after a while, her movements fell out of sync with the beat and lost their rhythm, leaving her breathless after the exercise. A satisfied Lila asked him what he thought of her performance. Initially, Dane wasn't entirely honest, saying she performed fantastically and that he enjoyed it. Observing her, Lila felt pleased with the praise, but DNE chose to be honest. He noticed she still had room for improvement. For instance, after the third form, Lila took an unnecessary half-step, which recurred in subsequent forms. These repeated extra half-steps caused the later sword forms to feel slightly misaligned. Such criticism left Leia speechless. It appeared she was on the verge of tears, and Dan began to feel the criticism might have been too harsh. He even started apologizing for upsetting her, admitting he could be wrong since he had last seen the swordsman wield the blade long ago. However, his concern was unnecessary. Lila swiftly regained her composure and tightened her grip on the sword. Recognizing her error, she began practicing the training moves once more, and this time they were flawless. Dana's guidance turned out to be the missing piece she needed for perfection. Overwhelmed with joy and gratitude, she even hugged Dan. Though our hero attempted to resist, his efforts were in vain. Lila was utterly captivated by his profound knowledge of swordsmanship, which he demonstrated in an instant. She realized her past mistakes and what her teachers had failed to explain. She vowed to remember his help. Eventually, she released Dan, nearly suffocating him in her embrace, though she almost struck him with her sword. That young lady truly needed a lesson in precision. Dana was surprised by the sudden hug, but it wasn't unwelcome. Their moment, of course, was unforgettable. The tranquility of their privacy was quickly disrupted by servants calling out as they searched everywhere. Having rested sufficiently after the banquet, they decided not to hide any longer and hurried back to avoid being found at the training grounds. Upon their return, DNE became the focal point as his parents formally celebrated his birthday and acknowledged the discovery of his first manicore as expected. He was given a present, a brooch bearing the family crest, much like those his elder sisters owned. His mother urged him to cherish it, as the brooch would now symbolize his status and honor. Following his parents, all the guests offered their congratulations. DNE had now truly and officially earned the name Sres, and no one doubted he would grow into a respectable man. Like his father, Danae's parents were overjoyed, as was little Dan himself. It was the first time in his 2 lives that he had received such heartfelt congratulations from so many people. Suddenly, the entire room trembled. The guests screamed and panicked, fearing an earthquake or an enemy invasion. Dane, too, grew anxious, but his father swiftly reassured him. He reassured him that there was nothing to fear. Arkan's SRE was fully aware of what was happening, even though he had hoped today would be peaceful. Apparently, his daughter hadn't heeded his words. DNE truly didn't expect lightning bolts to emerge near the hall's ceiling. In an instant, a portal materialized above the terrified guests, leaving them in a state of endless alarm. Astonishment filled the room as a small figure emerged from the portal, seemingly mocking the laws of physics, and landed effortlessly on the floor. It was Don's elder sister, Arabella, who, in her view, was not late at all. The guests remained stunned, their jaws still dropped, amazed that such a young girl could already master teleportation magic, typically reserved for opening portals. Even a small gate required traversing at least 5 chains. DNE showed no admiration for her power. Instead, he was irritated by her loud and flashy demeanor. However, as the guests began to settle, a massive monster emerged in the sky, a giant wyvern with a rider. This time, Lady Claire startled the guests, though her mood was sour. She was just a step too late to take the lead. As her sister entered, the guests began discussing how they had heard she was an exceptional summoner, though no one anticipated her ability to command a wyvern at just 16. Eventually, they returned home and stood together before their parents and brother to wish their beloved younger sibling, DNE, a happy birthday. Following their dramatic arrivals, the sisters quickly handed their gifts to their younger brother, wishing him a happy birthday. He expressed gratitude to Arabella and CLA for traveling back home, despite their busy academic schedules. The girls were thrilled to watch their little brother unwrap the presents. Duke Aaron almost teared up, noticing the special attention his son received, unlike his daughters who were given less. Arabella handed him a box, which Danae opened, to find a ring transformed into a practical, dimensional pouch. She had personally designed the artifact, utilizing subspace magic of the highest tier in its creation. Esteemed Professor Arabella had applied this advanced magic to the ring, a feat widely recognized as exceptionally challenging due to the complexity of infusing subspace magic. Arabella took the ring and lovingly held her brother's hand to place it on. She must have invested considerable time crafting an artifact strong enough to endure an entire subspace. Additionally, she incorporated Dan's genetic code into the ring, ensuring only her younger brother could use it. It was truly a unique item. Mommy Lily inspected the ring and noticed a faint surge of mana. Circling the artifact indicated it was crafted with top-tier magic stones, Arabella explained. All Dan needed was to infuse a bit of mana into the ring to establish the subspace. This made it far more convenient than standard dimensional pouches, rendering the artifact invaluable. As far as Danae could recall, such tools were typically reserved for, exclusively utilized by the elite on the battlefield. Such rings were wielded only by noble-born commanders and high-ranking mages, symbolizing immense power. The ring would expand as its wearer aged, seamlessly adapting to their body. Dane attempted to channel his mana into the artifact, and a green portal materialized before everyone. Duke Arkin stood in awe, witnessing his son achieve this with such ease. Claire, Duke B, and Thien were equally astonished. Lila was utterly astonished by the dazzling magic demonstration. Dan had opened a subspace quicker than Arabella had achieved years prior. He was undeniably a genius. It would be an extraordinary accomplishment if he could cultivate both a Mane and a Mage's Circle simultaneously. Following the magical display, Claire approached her younger brother and presented him with her gift. He carefully unwrapped the gift, sincerely thanking his older sister. Inside the wooden box lay a strange-looking egg resting on a soft cloth. Confused, he picked it up and asked what it was. CLA, alarmed, urged him to handle it with care, explaining it wasn't an ordinary egg. The entire family was curious about the peculiar present, but CLA only disclosed its false nature to him. Dana whispered that it was a familiar, something she obtained by accident while attempting to summon Darren. Claire herself had no idea what would emerge from it, though the world universally understood the immense value of a familiar. DNE tried to imagine what this peculiar egg might yield. He had heard of familiars before. Unlike summons, they were an entirely distinct being. Summoned once, it can stay in the real world forever. Claire insisted that DNE must keep the egg hidden until it hatches later. He vowed to stop all the whispering between the two, which annoyed Arabella, who felt excluded. As for Claire's instructions, DNE must pour his mana into the egg twice daily, morning and evening, so it would recognize him as its own. Master Lily was simply delighted that her young son was receiving such wonderful presents, which highlighted the strong bond and affection among her children. Once the gift-giving concluded, Duke Orin cleared his throat and urged his daughters to at least greet their parents, especially since they had unexpectedly attended the party after initially indicating they might not be able to come. He noted that they hadn't yet spoken a word to them. Since their arrival, the girls awkwardly greeted their father. Duke Aaron, a gentle soul with his children, didn't mind. He was simply overjoyed to see his daughters again. After they left to pursue their careers, they rarely returned home, making this reunion all the more special. Seeing them healthy and well brought him immense happiness. Leia observed the Grace family's affectionate interactions with warmth. Cheerfully interacting from a distance, the young girl couldn't help but contrast her own family life with theirs. Dai caught her gaze and turned, sensing her sudden melancholy as she quietly retreated. He pondered why she appeared so isolated and sorrowful amidst the vibrant gathering of nobles. The banquet concluded, and the following day arrived. Duke Bout Thermion had remained overnight. As he walked through Cinter territory, he couldn't help but reflect on Arabella Senior's remarkable talent, as expected of the Academy's top mage. Her mastery of the magical arts was unmatched. She seemed the ideal match for Duke Therion's son, the Academy's finest swordsman. If Houses Shrees and Therion united through their marriage, it would undoubtedly bring significant advantages. The birth of a faction capable of rivaling even the imperial family would render both houses and their children untouchable. Thus, Duke Therion resolved to bring up the topic of an engagement between their eldest children during today's discussion with Aaron. On their way to meet the other Duke, Therion overheard the clashing of steel nearby, emanating from the training grounds. Someone is undoubtedly refining their technique very early in the morning. Of course, it's DNE, sharpening his spear skills with intense focus. Over years of training with his father and driven by an exceptional work ethic, he has grown exceptionally lethal with the weapon, fully combat-ready. DNE's concentration is unmatched. He moves with the precision and fluidity of a seasoned warrior. Soaring across the battlefield, delivering lethal strikes, he increased his speed and intensified his efforts. His arms became a blur as he unleashed a flurry of spear thrusts in mere moments. Duke Theron, driven by curiosity, observed the boy's training from a distance. He was pleasantly impressed by the youngest son's prowess. Sir was observing during training with his experienced gaze. He could see how remarkably polished Danae's technique was. His movements and focus didn't resemble those of a 7-year-old in the slightest. Even his basic thrusts were refined to an astonishing level. Everything was performed with such precision that Spearman, despite his years on the battlefield, could still appreciate the mastery. When Dan finally completed his last sequence, he was gasping for breath. Duke Theron was thoroughly impressed from start to finish. What he had just witnessed seemed impossible. He had heard rumors about the young SRE's exceptional talent, even back when he was just a baby, but he had always dismissed them as exaggerated hearsay. Now he knew they were false. The rumors proved false. After a brief pause, DNE resumed training, concentrating on his movement and footwork this time. As one of the region's most skilled swordsmen, Duke Theron couldn't help but notice the boy's stance and footwork resembled that of a master. The Duke began to suspect the young man might have mastered swordsmanship to an advanced level. At such a young age, DNE finally noticed someone watching him from the doorway. He raised his spear, prepared to strike, and demanded the hidden observer to reveal themselves. Duke Thurman, overly eager, had been detected by a child, a far from proud moment for a seasoned warrior. The more he reflected on Danae's actions, the more peculiar they seemed. The scene felt familiar. He was sure he had witnessed that footwork somewhere before. The Duke had to step forward and apologize to DNE for overhearing his private training session. He assured him he meant no harm, as the eavesdropper was Duke Thuron himself. Despite having lived in his current body for 7 years, DNE regretted speaking out of turn. This man was the same one who had defeated and killed him in his past life. Recalling his etiquette lessons, Dan Sras formally greeted Duke Thuron. The Duke admitted he was captivated by the sight of the rising stars during their early morning training and offered another apology. The boy maintained his composure, stating he was forgiven. The Duke was amused by the child's boldness in speaking as though they were equals. Upon closer observation of DNE, he realized the boy showed no signs of fatigue or trembling, despite the rigorous training. At his age, he hadn't even mastered Mana Core. The Duke praised Dan's precise stabbing technique, noting he had inherited Aaron's spear talent. The spear itself was exceptionally crafted. Dan formally expressed his gratitude to the Duke for acknowledging his technique. The old man smirked, recognizing not only the boy's lethal skills, but also his ability to speak appropriately in any situation. In contrast, his own son lacked such refined manners and abilities at the age of 7. This brief encounter led Duke Theron to contemplate arranging a marriage between Lila and Dan, prompting a subtle shift in his thoughts. He mentioned that his daughter had also been practicing swordsmanship and suggested that, being of a similar age, they should watch out for each other once they entered the academy in the future. Danae continued to respond politely, and the Duke appreciated the young man's straightforwardness. Eventually, Duke Theron excused himself to avoid further interrupting Dan's training. Before departing the training hall, he still had one lingering question he wished to address: whether the boy had ever trained in swordsmanship. Dan had slipped up in the Duke's presence, his old habits resurfacing unintentionally. Given Duke Thurman's sharp observation, it was no surprise he noticed even the slightest nuances at a glance. He mentioned that he had only read a few basic swordsmanship textbooks, but had never received formal training. The Duke still found it odd that he detected something resembling raw battlefield intuition in the boy, though common sense suggested an inexperienced child couldn't possess such a killer instinct. Finally, the Duke got up, bid farewell, and dismissed him. Thuron also invited him to visit if he ever came to the capital in the future. The swordsman had taken a personal interest in Dane's abilities. Dane wondered if the man still remembered him. Simply thinking about defeating someone who had ended his life before was enough to ignite his excitement. If he built a strong foundation and prepared meticulously, he could succeed. He was confident in surpassing the Duke. Defeating the formidable Theron was one of his life's ambitions. Continuing his training, Dane lost track of time, prompting Hernan, the attendant, to retrieve him. Hernan had always observed the boy from the shadows, ever ready to assist. With Hernan's subtle presence, Dane thought this man might possess the talent to learn as well. Assassination and stealth skills were in focus today. Everyone was occupied with preparations for the second banquet. Some nobles had already arrived at the location. Gathering over 30 noble families to arrive precisely on the same date proved challenging. As for Dane's sisters, they had opened a teleporter gate and returned to the academy together. It was unavoidable. As their midterm exams approached, it was time for DNE to tidy up and prepare as well. He reminded himself to examine the gifts his sisters had given him the night before. After his rigorous training, DNE freshened up and dressed appropriately. He then joined his parents in the family hall, where he interacted with various nobles, putting his etiquette training to use. Throughout the night, he mingled with the elite, showcased as the birthday boy, drawing everyone's focus. Eventually, he escaped the banquet hall to catch his breath. The life of nobility was exhausting, his schedule busier than usual as the guest of honor. Yet, he always found solace in their stunning garden, meticulously maintained by Mr. Garter. It's challenging to cultivate this unique place so beautifully, the kind of beauty that brings peace. Don gazed at the flowers in full bloom, bursting with vibrant colors as butterflies fluttered around. He recalled his eldest sister teaching him about how flowers hold the most mana in nature. With some spare time on his hands, he figured he might as well attempt to analyze the mana within them. Donna closed his eyes, focusing intently on the natural flow of magic in the air. Without opening them, he began to grasp the concept his sister had explained. Gradually, he sensed the mana within the flowers. He had been training in multiple fields simultaneously, but had yet to see significant progress in mage and summoning magic. Struggling to make strides, he continued to persevere. Selecting which areas to focus his efforts on, having an abundance of talents, could occasionally prove challenging. In this moment, he was truly grappling with the burden of his own success. After spending a few moments absorbing the natural energy in the garden, he finally perceived the mana within the flowers. He was astonished that something so small could hold such a powerful, surging flow of energy, if one could truly sense the rhythm of nature. The principle could integrate into the body to create a magic circle, which is exactly what is occurring now. His body's exceptional mana affinity greatly aided this process. He could distinctly perceive what others only vaguely sensed with their sixth sense. A single visit to the garden had significantly enhanced his mana perception, allowing him to grasp what he previously could only barely discern. What he had previously seen faintly became clearer. He was on the verge of understanding magic's inner workings when he sensed something break. Meanwhile, 2 noble siblings had wandered into the garden, bored by the adults' chatter in the banquet hall. The older redhead was resentful that no one paid him attention, as all the talk was about the prodigy. Syrah's child stomped aggressively across the flower bed, crushing the blossoms beneath his feet. The red-haired siblings, lost in the vast garden, spotted DNE standing nearby. Observing his attire, they misjudged him as a servant and shouted at him. DNE, unappreciative of the disrespect, was not pleased with the audacity of this insolent child who dared to command him. He and his brother were led to the exit. DNE noticed their actions toward the flowers and shouted at them to stop trampling the plants. The red-haired individual had the audacity to feel insulted by the reprimand. DNE questioned why they were destroying the flower bed instead of using the garden paths. Seeing DNE's smaller stature, the red-haired one persisted in his disrespectful behavior, eventually boasting about his family name. All noble brats did not care, though to him they appeared as a pair of brutes destroying his garden's flower bed. The red bastard disliked being called a brute, but acted like one, grabbing DNE by the collar. He and his brother were the sons of Count Tyrone, a guest of the castle. Hearing Count Tyrone's name reminded Dan of a memory from his previous life. That man was the noble. After a humiliating defeat in battle, he was captured. He recalled Count Tyron as a vexing noble, one of those insufferable individuals. Judging by the brute's behavior before him now, the saying, like father, like son, seemed fitting. The red-haired bastard continued to flaunt his family's name, boasting of their renown in the capital. He even claimed his house could rival Dan, vanish without a trace, so he'd better watch his words. DNE had encountered fools like this kid before, and knew words wouldn't penetrate the thick, air-filled skull of the red idiot. The boy raised his fist, swinging at DNE, still believing he was merely intimidating a servant. But DNE wasn't about to let that slide. He retaliated by slamming his head against him. The red bastard's nose was struck as hard as possible, a critical hit that almost crushed it. The younger sibling anxiously called his older brother, who checked on the red bastard. Slumped on the ground after the hard hit, he wiped his nose, saw blood, and panicked as if he'd never bled before. When he saw the red on his hand, the red bastard's blood boiled, and he, threatening to kill DNE. The threat seemed amusing. Our boy stood his ground and challenged the brat to go ahead and try. The red bastard sought to repay blood with blood. His younger brother, showing some sense, attempted to stop him, but the red bastard was too enraged to be halted. The brute threw a punch, which Danny casually dodged by leaping back. It was a clear mismatch from the start, and through Dan was far too slippery for an amateur. While he let the red bastard tire out, he noticed the brat's footwork was sloppy, as if he had never wielded a weapon in his life. Dan speculated the bastard might be a mage or a summoner. The barrage of punches persisted, not one coming close to grazing a single strand of Dan's hair or the red bastard's nose. As his patience waned and the bleeding persisted, DNE continued to toy with his opponent using his superior footwork. An idea struck him. Perhaps he could channel the flow of magic he had observed earlier on the flower, merging it with his will. If successful, he might compress that force into a tangible form. Seizing the moment, he decided to test this theory in the heat of battle. The bastard's younger brother stood on the sidelines, his mouth agape. DNE firmly planted his feet and began gathering magic in his hands. He envisioned a sphere of raw mana and hurled it straight at the brat's stomach. The impact was so intense that it sent the red-haired bastard tumbling across the grass, leaving a trail of chaos on the concrete. He writhed in pain, screaming in sheer agony as his body took the brunt of the force. With his ego wounded, the younger brother checked on his defeated older sibling lying in the flower bed. DNE seemed more worried about the ruined flowers than the well-being of the red bastard. Despite his condition, the red bastard was relentless, still having enough strength to rise again. Noticing DNE's use of magic, he demanded to know his identity. Meanwhile, the younger brother persisted in trying to dissuade his older sibling, but his efforts were in vain. His pride was too deeply wounded to concern himself with any fallout or trouble. The red bastard summoned the mana within his body and began opening a sinister portal. DNE was startled to recognize the familiar sight. This type of magic was the domain of summoners. The mana swirled and merged until a translucent wolf began to descend to the ground, its gaze unmistakably bloodthirsty. With its menacing snarl and bared fangs, the red-hued figure laughed maniacally as he summoned his entity, Genpu. Introducing himself as Dagon Tyron, he prepared to show Dan the repercussions of challenging someone of his stature. Dan listened as the arrogant figure commanded the wolf to tear him apart, yet he remained unimpressed by the summon. To him, it felt inadequate, lacking the power to instill fear. He had grown accustomed to witnessing his sister CLA summoning terrifying creatures, such as her wyvern Degron. Standing at a distance, he observed as Genpu lunged toward the motionless Danny. Dan simply locked eyes with the wolf, refusing to flinch. Genpu seemed to sense that pursuing the attack would lead to a dire outcome, prompting the wolf to abruptly turn tail, spinning 180 degrees. Its aura visibly shifted, as if the aggression aimed at DNE had completely vanished, leaving the Tyron brothers stunned. Dion's pride was shattered as his summoned creature appeared to defy him, now acting submissive toward DNE. Duran shouted at the summon, commanding it to tear DNE's throat and kill him. But the orders were ignored. Instead, the large puppy began wagging its tail cheerfully in DNE's direction. Perceiving no hostility from the summoned beast DNE, the good boy received gentle pets, though he remained puzzled by how this situation unfolded. Reflecting on it, even Claw's summons had always been friendly toward him. The wyvern would occasionally play with him. At the time, he assumed it was because of his blood ties to his sister. However, in this scenario, where no such connection existed, the reason remained unclear. The summoned beast maintained a friendly demeanor toward familiar relation, suggesting either an unusually high affinity for all summoned creatures, or Gino's favorability toward his illegitimate summoner had plummeted entirely. Dagon was baffled, having never encountered a summon betraying its master. Meanwhile, DNE continued to dominate on all fronts, leaving him perplexed. Continued taunting Duran to come at him. Lil Bro was practically begging his big bro to stop embarrassing himself and accept the L to no avail. Daon's pathetic ass still wanted to fight, but Lil Bro really needed this fight to be over. The poor kid, caught up by his brother's foolishness, had peed his shorts in fear. Lil Bro cried, and Doran cursed him out for being an embarrassment, DNE added. Adding salt to their wounded pride, he highlighted the bathhouse in the castle's basement. Dron exploited his brother's mishap to escape, as if he hadn't already embarrassed himself enough. He commanded Dana to remain in the garden. Dan simply glared at the pitiful fool with disgust. Dagon didn't even bring his summon along. Our boy kept lounging around, unfazed. In the garden, experimenting with his newfound grasp of mana, he attempted a trick Claire had taught him. Before severing the faint link between Degron and Genpu, he carefully analyzed its remnants. Cutting it off, he replaced the bond with his own magic. Through this process, he and the wolf became officially connected, a feat remarkable for a child who had yet to master even the basics properly. Through skillful summoning, he executed the complex feat by capitalizing on his strong rapport with summoned creatures, officially cementing his status as a summoner. As he reveled in his triumph, DNE detected a familiar, irksome voice searching for him. Duran Tyron, the entitled brat, had tattled to his father, claiming he was bullied by a certain kid. In the garden, he gestured toward DNE. The coward pinched his nose to stem the bleeding, whining to his father about being roughed up by DNE and severing the connection with his summoned giant Mogard. Tyron stepped forward, introducing himself with pride as the head of the Tyron Count family, one of the capital's prominent nobles. He boldly questioned whether DNE had truly caused the harm to his son. Confronted and aggressively robbed of his summon, our boy wasn't the type to retreat before a pig, so he stood his ground and owned his actions. He observed that Mogar Tyron appeared much heavier now compared to when he had taken the pig captive. Peaceful times seemed to be treating him well, despite his disgraceful performance on the battlefield. Mogard continued to posture, insisting that he couldn't allow it. This issue came to pass, as interfering with his children was something he could not ignore. The pig persisted with his relentless barrage of questions and eventually demanded the boy reveal his identity. Holding his head high, the boy formally introduced himself as Danny Sross, the youngest son of Arkan Sross, the Lord of the South and head of the Sross Count family. The boy delivered this with conviction. The Game of Thrones introduction left the trashy father and son duo utterly stunned. Unknowingly, they had offended the Badnia birthday boy, unaware they were dealing with the South's celebrated rising star. The Duke is visibly perplexed by this unexpected encounter with the youngest son of House Sers. Reflecting on noble houses, he remembers being captured by that individual. ARG played no notable role in the conflict, earning the mockery of every prominent noble. Now he views this as an ideal chance to manipulate circumstances to his advantage, aiming to tarnish Count Sis's reputation and exploit it to claim mining rights. The nobles who once scorned him may soon find themselves compelled to submit to his will. Such is the strategy of a cunning mind. Fatty turns to our boy, inquiring if he's the birthday boy. DNE's guy simply shakes his head in response, confirming it positively. Fatty barely contains his frustration, as he certainly didn't come to celebrate some brat's birthday. He then points to his lousy son, Doran, and demands of DNE how he intends to compensate for the humiliation he caused his son. Nothing less. Did DNE harm his son, who was a guest invited by Cerise? Not only that, but he also stole their summon, a serious offense. The disgraceful son sided with his equally dishonorable father, telling DNE it was his last day. The overweight man then threatened our boy, claiming he would speak with Count Senior directly and hold him accountable. DNE simply acknowledged his words without further response, and he adds that before approaching his father, he insists his son apologizes first. Naturally, the chubster explodes in rage, demanding to know what he's talking about, while his son also clenches his teeth in anger. However, DNE clarifies that while he did hide his son and cause him pain, it was solely in self-defense against a life-threatening danger. He further stresses that his actions were justified. Genpu didn't steal their summon, he chose to follow him. The trash son quickly interjects, insisting there's no way Genpu would do such a thing, and accuses Danai of lying. This prompts the father to pause and reflect. He remembers hearing that the second daughter of House Cerise is a genius summoner, leading him to believe there's a strong possibility she taught Dan how to forcibly sever a summon. The connection between familiar and master continues to fluctuate as Chubster keeps engaging with our protagonist. Meanwhile, Dan can't shake the feeling that this is a tedious ordeal. Eventually, Mogard decides to calm down as his jaw starts to ache from talking incessantly. He informs DNE that he'll refrain from further scolding and suggests they seek Count Sri's opinion on the current situation. Talk of the devil, the Count himself appears, accompanied by Duke Theron. Naturally, both the trashy son and his father are utterly stunned to see Count Sers. What's even more astonishing for them is Duke Theron's presence. As night descends, the red-haired boy recounts his story to the Count, explaining how he simply got lost in the garden with his younger companion. The brother, which is why he requested DNE to guide them, keeps talking and fabricating stories while Dane stands casually behind him, pondering how his father is actually listening to this man. It seems unsurprising to him, considering Count Ceris's deep concern for his family and its reputation. He isn't the kind to show bias toward any side, even in disputes with outsiders. Distinguish right from wrong, the red-headed boy concludes his story by explaining that suddenly DNE headbutted him and repeatedly used a strange technique to mock him. He asserts that to scare DNE away, he called for his summon, but DNE took it from him and attempted to counterattack. After Daigon finishes speaking, Mogard steps forward, stating that his intentions were solely to issue a warning to Dan. Yet he maintains that stealing someone's summon is unequivocally wrong, and he cannot overlook that aspect. Eventually, Count Sres intervenes, informing Mogard that he won't make a judgment based solely on one side of the argument. He insists on hearing Dan's perspective, evaluating the entire situation, and then forming a conclusion. He also reassures them of his impartial approach. Mogard fears that if biased judgments are a concern, Duke Thurian will also weigh in on the issue. The Duke quickly smirks and declares that if it's that crucial, he can manage it. Mogard feels frustrated, his face drenched in sweat. He senses he's about to be undermined. Involving Thurian will only complicate matters further, and he's uneasy about the situation, Count. Shrees grants his son permission to clarify the situation, and Dan prepares himself, stating that Mard's son's account wasn't entirely accurate, though some parts were false. He explains that the flowers they had meticulously nurtured in their garden were carelessly trampled by Mard's son, prompting Danae to simply ask him to leave. This, however, angered Mard's son, sparking the ensuing fight. Both Fatty and his son are utterly stunned upon hearing these harsh truths, with the son even attempting to refute them by calling Danae a liar. However, the Count instructs Danae to proceed, prompting him to elaborate further. Danae explains that when Mard's son summoned Genpu, his command was to kill him. He also clarifies that he did not steal the summon. Rather, Genpu approached him first, drawn by his goodwill. The Duke listens intently. It's utterly astonishing to witness how effortlessly this 7-year-old speaks with such grace and precise word choice. Meanwhile, DNE reaffirms that he never stole anyone's summon. Mogard, however, loses his temper, stomping his feet and dismissing it as nonsense. He argues that it's impossible for a summon to yield to someone who isn't even a summoner, firmly insisting that DNE must be lying. They employed some dubious methods to achieve it, but unsurprisingly, DNE informs Mard that he has a natural affinity for summons. A summon not closely bound to its master might also yield to someone like him. Mard refuses to believe it, while our boy calmly asserts it's false. Mard's face twists as if he's suffering severe constipation, and he simply says, The Duke interrupts, implying that the child is fabricating the story, and proposes verifying it through a summon count. Srez then turns to his son, inquiring if he can provide proof, to which Dan agrees. Meanwhile, Mogard shoots a menacing glare at his son for landing him in this predicament, while the arrogant son is certain he's about to be betrayed by his father, having no clue how he'll handle the situation. The boy attempts to summon Genpu, but fails completely, provoking his father to shout at him as anticipated. Meanwhile, Danny smirks, knowing he has already severed the connection, making it impossible for the boy to summon Genpu. Dan then decides to demonstrate by summoning Genpu himself, but notes that a sign is necessary to accomplish it. Mogard's son, the brat, becomes enraged, questioning DNE's audacity and demanding his sign. He rambles on with nonsense, but Count Shrees interrupts, reminding him that by their own logic, even if Dana uses the sign, he shouldn't be able to summon Genpu, so there's no harm in trying. Mogard, sweating, admits he has no choice but to provide the sign and reluctantly complies. The spoiled son, Doron, demands to take it. The redhead is on the verge of tears, but his father simply urges him to hurry. Once Danny holds the sign, he begins his magic. He explains that a summon sign typically bears the summoner's unique code, making it unusable by others. However, the Genu summoned by Daigon was infused with his mana, allowing it to function differently. The summon sign is merely a conduit, and Genpu has already bonded with him. As soon as he calls out again, Pooh the monster emerges and begins licking his cheeks. Both the Count and the Duke are astonished, while Mogard and Degron tremble after being caught in their deceit. The Duke is amazed and questions whether DNE was also learning Spearman's ship. His father confirms this, but concedes he isn't. Not entirely confident in his son's skills, the chubby one, however, realizes his entire plan has backfired, leaving him in trouble. The Count then confronts him, asking if he admits that Dana is truthful. The overweight man swiftly attempts to remain composed, laughing it off while acknowledging they might have wrongly accused DNE of theft. He also admits his son wasn't genuinely capable. Attempting to kill DNE, he asks his defiant son if it's false. Degron hesitates, but nods in agreement with his father, claiming they only meant to frighten DNE away. Enraged, our boy watches as these cowards try to evade responsibility so effortlessly. Before the elders can deliver their final judgment, a woman enters the scene, startling everyone, particularly DNE, who is visibly shaken. Eager to catch sight of Lila, they watch as she casually enters the scene, asserting that Degron's claims are false. Her father promptly inquires about her presence, to which she replies that she overheard his voice during her stroll. Before delving further into the discussion, she swiftly greets the chubby man and Count Shrees. The overweight man, taken aback, stammers in surprise as he attempts to return her greeting. Clearly startled by the unexpected meeting with the Duke's daughter, Count Shrees promptly gets to the point, questioning her assertion that Degron was lying. She confidently affirms this, stating she had overheard their conversation earlier during her walk. Degron begins to unravel at the realization that she might have heard everything, as that would certainly not good news for him. She proceeds to share all the juicy details, and the man can't help but smirk at this unexpected twist that somehow worked in his favor. A short while later, the overweight man urges his crude son to hurry and apologize to Count Shrees. The son mutters a quick admission of being wrong, but the Count directs him to apologize to DNE instead. The chubby man promptly pushes his son forward. He urges Dan to apologize promptly. The spoiled son appears uneasy, hesitates, and stammers out a feeble, half-hearted sorry. Dan, however, is far from pleased, sensing the apology is insincere, merely a forced gesture after his lie was exposed by a third-party witness. Though Dan doesn't wish to accept such a weak apology, he pauses to consider the situation. Drawing from his past, he chooses to rise above stubbornness and act with generosity. With this mindset, Dan accepts the mischievous son's apology, and the child beams with joy, eagerly thanking him for being lenient. Meanwhile, the overweight father breathes a sigh of relief, aware of how narrowly he avoided losing everything on the other side. The Duke, who could potentially become Dan's future father-in-law, couldn't help but reflect on how he already knew DNE was an exceptional child. After all, DNE could have easily been obstinate about the matter, especially since the opposing party was clearly at fault from the beginning. Ultimately, the Count emphasized that since DNE had accepted the apology, there would be no further dispute on the issue. However, he stresses that he had no plan to overlook the matter, particularly since Dr. Ron targeted DNE with the intent to kill him. The overweight father begins to sweat profusely upon witnessing the Count's intense reaction. As he attempts to speak, the Count silences him abruptly, instructing him to gather his family and vacate the castle at once. This directive leaves the man deeply unsettled. The world is shaken to its core. If he's cast out now, his reputation will be ruined. Desperate to stay in the castle at any cost, he frantically seizes the Count's hand, pleading for forgiveness, vowing to do anything asked of him. He begs for just one chance to be forgiven. However, the Count swiftly pulls his hand away, making it clear he has no use for him. The stout man informs him that soldiers will soon arrive to formally escort him out. With that, he begins storming off the scene with his son, leaving the stout man behind, who desperately pleads for forgiveness. Cerise also tells Duke Thur it's time to leave, and Duke promptly calls for his little girl as they start walking away. As they stroll off, Danae turns his head. Returning to observe them, he felt content knowing they were receiving their just desserts. After all, they had initiated this entire chaos, so it was only fair they face the consequences. Regardless, he learned a crucial lesson today. His father could be truly intimidating when angry. Duke Theron then inquired if it was accurate that he had defeated Mogard's insolent son with a mana bullet. Danae. The Duke quickly acknowledges it, then can't help but highlight DNE's remarkable talent, not only in spear fighting but also in summoning and magic. It's truly extraordinary, and he's certain history has never witnessed such skill before. The proud father beams, expressing his pride in having such an exceptional son. Meanwhile, Danae basks in the praise, while Lila is visibly overwhelmed. She struggles to believe what she's hearing. Duke Theron then notes that while talent is one thing, Dan is also remarkably calm. Most children tend to become agitated during arguments and stubbornly insist they're right, but Dan doesn't do that. The Duke is certain the boy will mature into a fine man. The father promptly gives Dan a gentle pat on the head. It's too early to determine the outcome definitively. They'll have to wait until he's fully grown to see how things unfold. He also emphasizes that the peaceful resolution of the incident is entirely due to Leela, as without her testimony, things could have taken a much darker turn. When Duke Thermion hears this, he's genuinely surprised that the Cerise hold such a favorable opinion of Lila, and he doesn't miss the chance to act on this information. To squander and minimize her involvement in the event, she implies that if the Count values her so highly, perhaps they should begin discussing their marriage. Naturally, SRE is taken aback by this, and notices the Duke's eagerness to wed his daughter. To avoid the situation, he swiftly changes the subject, pointing out that the sun is setting and it's nearly time. At the banquet, he abruptly leaves, stating he'll meet them in the hall. He also tells his daughter to take her time, returning with DNE. He then dashes after the Count, claiming he wants a brief chat, leaving the two kids behind. As they walk, Lila turns to the boy and questions why the summoned ignored its summoner and obeyed him instead. Instead, she claims to have watched famous summoners duel numerous times in the capital, but has never seen anything like this. DNE shrugs and admits he's unsure as well, saying it just happened. Of course, Layla pouts in annoyance, feeling that Danae is deliberately hiding the truth, especially since she helped him out of that mess. Yet, he remains nonchalant and simply reminds her. He also reminded her of the time he aided her in improving her swordsmanship. Leah reflects on that moment and hesitantly admits he's correct. Eventually, Danae concludes that since they've supported each other before, they can do so again. He assures her she's free to ask him anything immediately. The girl brightens with excitement, exclaiming she wants to learn it right now. Dana is taken aback by her own impatience, curious about what could be so pressing. He inquires what she wishes to learn, and she promptly requests that he teach her to use a mana bullet. Dana questions her eagerness to master the mana bullet, to which Lila swiftly replies that she aims to become stronger and quicker. She aspires to create at least 2 mana core before joining the academy, leaving Danny pondering. Why is she in such a hurry when she's still so young? He finds the answer to his confusion when she explains that she wants to grow up quickly, to make her mother happy. Her mother loves her deeply, and Lila is convinced that becoming stronger would fill her with pride. As she mentions her mother, Dan remembers overhearing adults discuss Sest Thean, who is bedridden. With this in mind, he understands her urgency. It seems he has no option but to assist her. Lila joyfully dances and announces she's prepared to begin training tomorrow, though she wouldn't mind starting tonight as well, particularly since she's uncertain how long she'll remain at the mansion. Dan simply shakes his head and tells her she can start whenever she wishes, reassuring her that once she does, grasping the essence of magical flow, mastering the mana bullet shouldn't prove overly challenging for Leah. She eagerly inquires what he'll demand in exchange for teaching her. Dana's silence speaks volumes, hinting that the task he envisions is far from simple. It's no mere lesson in casting magic bullets. The scene shifts to the banquet hall, where guests murmur and whisper among themselves. They whisper about that portly Lord Tyrone, having heard he was expelled from the castle, speculating what offense warranted such disgrace. Some guests recall an incident involving Tyrone's eldest son, who provoked young Master DNE in a quarrel, only to be humbled. They laugh quietly, amused at the notion of the rotund noble seeking refuge here, only to face humiliation and embarrassment. Word has also spread that young Master DNE is an exceptional summoner. One guest speculates whether this means the Sri's house will now become a prestigious summoner house. However, another interjects, stating that it's not the only talent young Master DNE possesses. He can also wield magic, a claim they find hard to believe. The scene then shifts to a large mustachioed man introducing himself. Baron, known as Dana, inquires of the young man if he is aware of anything regarding the open territory in the east. Dan respectfully lowers his head and responds that he has heard the area is renowned for its grilled trout and sapphires. The man laughs warmly, acknowledging that Dana is entirely correct. He adds that the open territory's trout and sapphires are indeed the finest. On the continent, he pushes his daughter forward, mentioning he nearly forgot to introduce her. The girl steps up, introducing herself as Sylvia, and politely greets him. Dan is startled to see her and nervously responds with his own name. I have no idea why he's so nervous around her, but it seems we're about to find out soon. She dashes. She approached him with a sly grin and whispered that she'd heard he was the future heir of House SRA. Dan stammered an uncertain reply, but Sylvia cut him off eagerly, urging him to stop pretending. She insisted she'd heard of his many talents and declared bluntly that she would now be under his care, especially since there's a chance they might become family in the future. And now Danae's nervousness around her makes complete sense. This girl is just too direct and didn't hesitate for a second. Right then, Lila appears while Sylvia is still shaking hands with Dan. Unsurprisingly, Sylvia is startled to see a potential rival, while Lila, with her piercing gaze, she practically shoots daggers at our boy, demanding to know the identity of the lady. Sylvia instantly recognizes Lila and warmly greets her, introducing herself as the eldest daughter of Baron Owent. Lila attempts to respond with a gesture, but the anger etched on her face reveals her false feelings, despite her polite words as she says it's nice to meet Sylvia. The tension between the two women is palpable. Smiles filled with lethal intent prompt Danny to recall a memory, sensing both girls are fully prepared to clash. Eventually, Lila takes his hand, declaring she's borrowing him temporarily due to their prior arrangement. She shoots him a menacing look, questioning if he remembers their plans. Predictably, poor Dana has no clue. He has no clue what she's discussing, but he agrees anyway, apologizing to Sylvia and promising they'll talk again later. Sylvia forces a smile, assuring him they'll definitely talk later as Lila leads Dana away. Sylvia can't help but feel irritated at how this girl took him right from her grasp. Meanwhile, Leah hasn't calmed down either. She's utterly annoyed by the audacity of the situation. The girl attempts to take Dana from her. Under Leah's sharp gaze, Dana is startled and can't help but reflect that the Duke's beloved daughter, second only to the Emperor in power, is no match for the young lady from the Eastern Baron. It's no wonder Sylvia gave up so easily. Once Danae and Lila are outside, she begins questioning him intensely. Regarding his connection to Sylvia, she wonders if there's a possibility he might propose to her. However, he promptly denies any such relationship, clarifying they were merely exchanging greetings. Layla brightens at this, and even DNE notices her mood shift instantly. After walking briefly, they arrive at a secret spot, known only to DNE, who is confident about its significance. Once they enter this secluded spot, they're assured no one will disturb them. As soon as Leah steps inside, she lights up and breaks into a joyful dance, delighted by the beauty of the place. She's also relieved that their actions here will remain unnoticed. Dan agrees, confirming she's right. It's an ideal place to train. Before they begin, he asks if she's ever felt. Before Lila acknowledges her slight ability to sense mana, she admits it's insufficient to form a mana ray. She explains she's attempted to absorb mana through breathing, prompting DNE to note she's not yet at the emission stage. Having learned to naturally feel mana in battle, he's surprised a ducal house taught her this. Opting for a simpler approach, he decides to begin with basic instruction. The first step is to sense the mana she's absorbing. Leah appears slightly confused, so Dan explains that to expel mana from her body, she must first learn to control the mana within her. The key, he emphasizes, is imagination. He instructs her to close her eyes and visualize the mana swirling inside her. Yet, after a few moments, she attempts but feels absolutely nothing. Dana can tell from Leah's expression that she didn't fully grasp the instructions. Leah tries again, but still, nothing happens. Frustrated, she complains to Dan about why it isn't working. Dan reassures her that this is typical for a first attempt and encourages her to concentrate once more. Meanwhile, Count Srees is secretly observing the two children, unable to resist his curiosity. He is proud that his son is already teaching someone despite his young age, truly making him believe Dana has grown. Just then, Duke Theron sneaks up on Srees and asks what he's doing there. Srees' heart nearly skips a beat at the sudden question, but the Duke quickly reassures him not to be startled and asks if he's watching two lovebirds enjoying themselves. Alone time together, Count Srees raises an eyebrow and questions what he means by lovebirds and how he even got there. The Duke chuckles at the thought that the Count was attempting to hide in that place. He then reminds Srees how poorly he had sneaked around, especially since his wife is the Empire's legendary assassin. Poor Srees is left speechless, unsure of how to respond. Caught red-handed while sneaking around, the Duke playfully scolded him, warning that if the castle's owner were seen spying on others, it would tarnish his reputation. Naturally, the embarrassed father grew defensive, insisting he was merely following his son. The Duke chuckled at the excuse and couldn't resist noting that he too was simply following someone. The daughter realizes both fathers are utterly clueless. They stand side by side, behaving like teenagers, awkwardly observing their kids' interactions as if they were peeking at women outside a school gate. Meanwhile, back with the children, DNE opens his dimensional pouch, and the girl is impressed to see he already possesses such an item when Danae mentions it. His elder sister crafted it and recently gifted it to him. Leah begins to feel envious, unlike him, as her older brothers stopped paying her attention once they joined the academy. He then retrieves a mirror from the dimensional pouch, and the girl casually inquires about its purpose. He explains that he brought it just in case it might assist, as it makes visualization simpler. Something in her mind, while gazing at a mirror, rather than relying solely on imagination, prompts him to instruct the curious girl to stand before the mirror for a complete view of herself. The girl swiftly positions herself in front of the mirror and begins the magic limbo once more. This time, Dani notices her serious demeanor. She takes a deep breath as both doting fathers watch silently. Squatting on the ground as if in an Indian-style posture, Duke can't help but note that Lelia appears to be taking a liking to DNE. SRE questions if this is truly the case, and Duke explains it's unusual for Lelia to bond with someone so quickly. SRE wonders if that's accurate, given Lelia seems like a bright child. Duke then falls silent for a moment. Voicing his thoughts, he remarks that she appears radiant outwardly, but doubts the same can be said for her inner self. He elaborates that after her brothers departed for the academy, her mother fell ill and became bedridden, preventing them from spending time together as they once did. This circumstance has made it challenging for her to open up to others, and that has been the ongoing reality. The Count observes that if he already knows everything, there's little left to add. Thermion is genuinely touched that the Count noticed his behavior and admits he's intentionally acting cold toward his daughter. He explains that when raising his sons, he gave them excessive attention, which led to them becoming spoiled. However, Sras cautions him not to assume Lelia will turn out the same way, warning that she'll be hurt if she discovers the truth. Now it's clear why she sought Dan's help rather than her father, Thyon. He then jokingly points at his friend, teasing him about still complaining as he did in the past. However, the Count quickly counters, questioning when he ever did that, especially since his words were false. The Duke shifts the conversation, asking when he intends to send his son to the capital. He adds that if he's sending him, the ducal house will. Cerise wholeheartedly opens his doors and allows him to stay in the ducal castle. Cerise falls silent, glancing back at his child, and upon seeing him happy, he agrees to do as DNE wishes, granting him the freedom to choose his path, just like his older sisters. We also notice Miss SRA observing the doting father, clearly embarrassed by their shameless peeking, but eventually, she simply remains silent. Realizing that her love for her children has a peculiar power over her, she decides not to spoil the moment and pretends she saw nothing. Back with the kids, Lelia thanks DNE for his assistance, dubbing him a real genius. She confesses that although others label her a genius, she feels like weak sauce in comparison to him. Meanwhile, Dana casually glances around, observing the scene. If both fathers have silently departed, he reassures her that this is merely the start, and she will undoubtedly grow stronger too. She then inquires if he plans to attend the academy, as it's the sole place where the Empire's geniuses assemble. To this, he responds that he's uncertain and isn't convinced he needs to go, believing he can become quite strong through training alone. The girl begins to criticize him for his limited perspective, emphasizing that attending the academy isn't solely about studying. It's a crucial step toward establishing his noble faction and forging valuable connections from a young age. Danny is struck by her intelligence for a 7-year-old, impressed that she grasps how the real world operates. He finally replies to her reasoning, acknowledging her point. He is already aware of that, but shows no interest in joining the academy yet. There's a pile of unread books in the library, and he still has much to learn from his parents. Lelia agrees this is false, but questions if he doesn't wish to interact with peers his age, especially since she heard his older sisters are also attending the academy. It appears DNE is losing arguments against her determination, so he dismisses her by saying he might consider going in the future if he feels like it. She then invites him to visit her home once he decides to travel to the capital, and that's how they agree to meet again. Mentioning their reunion, she recalls to ask him when he'll make his request, now that he's taught her how to use mana bullets. He simply shakes his head and says he'll tell her when he goes to the capital. This shocks her, and she lets out a screeching roar of disbelief, likely because she's surprised he's going to the capital. Finally, the day of her departure arrives. As Lelia's carriage begins to roll down the road, DNE looks at a stone-like object in his hand, given to him earlier. The scene shifts back to when the Duke, his future father-in-law, handed him the mysterious object. When Dan inquires about it, his father-in-law explains it's a birthday gift, hoping he'll appreciate it. He adds that the symbols of their Therian house are revenge, the sword, and the blacksmith, tracing their lineage to the house's founder. Being a blacksmith, he ensured their house possessed the finest forge in the Empire, indeed the best on the entire continent. All Theran-made weapons safeguarding the Empire were crafted in that forge. Naturally, the boy already knew this, as his past knowledge revealed that every ore in the world could be found there, along with various mystical weapons and artifacts. Crafted in the continent's greatest forge, the father-in-law discloses that if Dani presents the insignia at the forge, they will forge a weapon of his choice. It is then revealed that this rock-like object is, in essence, an insignia, a certified token that validates the honor and skill of its bearer. Count Sries is utterly astonished upon witnessing the Duke surrendering such a treasured insignia, an object even the imperial family covets. The Duke merely pats his son-in-law on the head, urging him to grow well and assist his father. His potential wife waves a final farewell, and thus they part ways. In the present, his mother crouches beside him, noticing his crestfallen expression, and inquires if he's upset. He acknowledges that she was almost his first friend, and his mother reassures him that when he goes to the capital, he'll meet her again and even grow more handsome, which will surely impress her. He concedes that his mother is likely right, as he can't stay here forever, and there will be ample chances to see her in the future. With that, he bids her farewell. Until they meet again, the Duke, traveling in his carriage, remains preoccupied with thoughts of DNE. He finds it peculiar that every time he looks at him, he is reminded of the warrior Argir, who displayed the prowess of a triple-class warrior at a young age. The Duke is certain that had Argir lived, he could have ascended to become one of the Hexa-class knights of the Drenic Empire. That's why he hopes to reunite with Dani once he's grown stronger. A few days later, the boy sits alone before the egg he's been nurturing with mana each morning and evening, pondering if it's too soon for it to hatch. This egg contains a mysterious familiar, and even non-summoners can infuse it with their mana, imprinting themselves as its master. The master gains control over the summon before it hatches, enabling him to command a being that typically remains only temporarily. He understands that the quality of his mana must align with his familiar, and there are likely numerous complex conditions yet to be fulfilled. He has heard that some eggs never hatch because their conditions are never met, so he hopes this isn't the situation here, despite the changes he makes. Despite channeling a significant amount of his mana's flow and strength, there's still no response from the egg. After putting in considerable effort once more, he places it back, convincing himself he's being overly hopeful to succeed in a single attempt. Just then, the butler appears at the gate, asking Dana if he's ready. At that precise moment, the egg begins to react, emitting strange noises. Dan swiftly rushes toward it, certain he heard something. The butler suddenly enters the room, inquiring about the noise. Dana asks him to wait a moment while he examines the egg first. Yet, once again, he feels disappointed, realizing his excitement was for nothing as he senses no change. The butler asks if the egg reacted, to which Dan replies, no, admitting he likely imagined it. Finally, he moves on. In the training hall, he starts by practicing his swordsmanship. Upon observing his flawless movements, the butler becomes delighted and thrilled. He applauds and inquires since when he has been skilled in swordsmanship. Dane casually dismisses it, stating he simply felt like swinging the sword a bit. The butler lavishes him with praise, hailing him as a genius even talented with the sword as he gazes on. The sword DNE reflects on how learning to wield a new weapon, such as the spear, was enjoyable, though he longed to draw a sword. Sadly, he hadn't been able to hold one during that time, as his father kept a close watch. Thankfully, he's relieved he hasn't lost his skill with it. The butler swiftly rushes off to fetch snacks, returning with a tray full of delicacies, saying, Don decides to grab a quick bite before resuming his training, while we shift focus to Sis, who gazes out the window, lost in thought. He's been feeling somewhat drained from hosting this annual banquet, but through it, he's discovered that many nobles are closely watching the South. Most are keen to build a positive relationship with him, which is a welcome development. Since the war ended, the South has thrived with its favorable climate and opulence that nobles find irresistible. Perhaps their interest should have been evident from the beginning. Yet, despite this attention, it pales in comparison to the focus on Dan. The conflicts with Count Tyron's eldest son were far beyond Sis's comprehension. Dana surpassed expectations by handling the situation with maturity. He calmly and logically presented everything to the adults, which was highly impressive. He even confidently showcased his talent. His father can't help but feel that Dan is somewhat too mature for his age. At times, he wishes Dan would behave more like other kids, letting loose a bit as the clock inches closer. At the training hour, he realizes it's time to head to the training hall. He grabs the legendary spear, Dragon Tail, and decides to have Dane practice with it today. However, as soon as he steps onto the grounds with the spear in hand, he freezes upon seeing Dee swinging his sword instead. Curiosity sparks within him about the choice of the sword. His mind races back, convinced that Duke must have said something. Otherwise, there's no way Dane would be handling a sword after all that spear training. He just stands there, watching his son perform all these impressive moves. Seriously, Dane looks like he knows exactly what he's doing. The strength he's showing is something even experienced sword fighters would struggle to match. It makes his father wonder, since when did he learn all this? One thing is certain, DNE is undeniably skilled with a sword. Eventually, he calls out to his son, questioning when he mastered such impressive moves. It seems Dana's long-kept secret has finally been revealed, so he decides it's best to come clean. He confesses he never actually learned any of it. His admission leaves his father speechless. Father, even more bewildered, found himself questioning whether this was yet another of his son's concealed abilities. He began to muse aloud about how Dane had already mastered Spearman's ship magic, assassination, summoning, and now swordsmanship. He remarked that, if he were anyone else, he wouldn't believe a child could exhibit such prowess across so many disciplines. Finally, he turned to Dana and asked if he was curious about the world. Beyond their walls, DNE appears slightly confused, uncertain of his father's point. His dad then advises him to pursue exploration if he desires it, sincerely believing the country might be too limited for his son's immense talent. He warns that staying confined would mean missing out. Dan is overcome with a wave of sadness as he grasps his father's meaning. Father has accepted that he can't keep him forever, so he finally expresses his willingness to let him explore the world beyond. His dad smiles at this and promptly gets to the point, stating it's time to prepare his son for the real world. He admits it's bittersweet to see him go, but acknowledges the need to respect his son's wishes. Then he handed him the spear, mentioning he brought something particularly special today. Don quickly realizes what it is, and his father dispels any remaining uncertainty by recalling its Dragon Tail, the spear that responded to him on his first birthday. Extending his hand, he urges Dane to take it. The moment Dane grasps the spear, it begins to react, and he senses an immense surge of energy flowed through the weapon. His father, Chuckles, remarked that it was reacting far more intensely than when he was just a year old, and truly, who could fault him for that? He then proudly informed his son of his plan to train him to master the spear before his departure, urging him to prepare. He assured DNE that one day, Dragon Tail would be his, but first, he needed to grow. Strong enough to wield it with pride, Dan eagerly vows to work hard and honor his father's teachings. Later, in his room, Dan's mind is filled with thoughts about the outside world. He has always been curious about it, even during his long days as a soldier on the battlefield. All he truly knew was war, setting up camp, cleaning his weapons, eating bland food, and preparing for battle. The next battle seemed inevitable. The war had to end, or he had to die in combat. Those felt like his only choices. Now, with a chance at a normal life ahead, he struggles to picture existence beyond the battlefield. Yet, as DNE, he knows he must seize this opportunity, even if he's uncertain how his skills will be utilized or what the world holds. Whether to accept him or what he can achieve out there isn't the issue. For the first time, he has the opportunity to travel, explore, and accomplish whatever he sets his mind to. Initially, all he wanted was to stay and enjoy the warmth of this place, but his father's question changed his perspective. Now he's decided to step outside, and he's genuinely excited about it, just as he's thinking. His mother suddenly enters his room, startling him briefly. He inquires when she came in, and the cunning assassin woman notes he was so engrossed in thought that he didn't hear her knock. It's clear she's lying, as her assassin skills likely allowed her to slip in silently. She then questions if he's genuinely curious about the world beyond. The country is mentioned, and he responds positively, noting that his father once said staying here would waste his talent. After a moment of thought, he admits he's also curious about the outside world. He begins to apologize to his mother, but she embraces him, reassuring him there's no need to apologize. He reminds her that his sisters aren't here and expresses his concern about leaving for the outside world. The lady reassures him that she's fine with his decision, knowing how incredible his talents are. She adds that even if he chose not to go, the world outside would eventually beckon him. While she admits it would be wonderful if he could stay longer with his mother, she acknowledges the world wouldn't allow it. She encourages him to pursue his desires, and he promises to do so. Even if he leaves home, he'll frequently return to share all he sees in the world. The mother thanks him, saying it seems she must now teach him before sending him out, just as his father is about to do. As he wonders aloud what kind of teaching she means, the mother eagerly rambles about teaching him everything related to assassination. She continues to elaborate on all the skills and knowledge she possesses, and DNE can't help but feel this will result in some incredibly tiring days, even before he steps outside. Ultimately, she informs him she'll be teaching him a great deal, and he reassures her he'll put in his best effort to learn. As he looks at her, he can't help but anticipate the unique lessons from his mother, filled with warmth and affection. Numerous years have elapsed, and the scene shifts to the southern area of the Altan Empire, SRE County, renowned for its mild weather and plentiful natural assets. This locale has evolved into a pillar of the empire, aiding its resilience throughout the conflict, owing to Count Sis's benevolent governance. It's a domain brimming with tranquility and hospitality. Ultimately, as the war draws to a close, the small rebel forces have been captured, ushering in an era of enduring peace. On a bright day, people are abuzz with talk of young Master DNE's recent visit to a shop. They can't stop mentioning how the shopkeeper's eldest daughter fainted at the sight of him. The women gossip, remarking that he's growing more. Handsome by the day, they wish to catch a glimpse of his face just once. A rumor circulates that he's still single, sparking hope. One friend, however, reminds them he's only 14, urging her to stop drooling over an underage boy. Another adds that there are rumors Dan doesn't seem like A. At just 14 years old, he's already as tall as Count SRE, with some claiming he could easily pass for a 20-year-old. Enough of the rumors, though. Let's see for ourselves how much he's grown. To do so, we head to the outskirts of Sars County, a place steeped in ancient magic known as the Forest of the Last Days. Here, Dan is on a special mission assigned by his mother, Lily Srees. We catch a glimpse of him holding a spear in one hand, and what appears to be a piece of cloth, perhaps a map, in the other. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but he has already determined his path. With only 3 hours left before sunset, he knows he must escape the forest before dark. He starts his journey, leaping through the trees with the nimbleness of a ninja. The most crucial aspect of this mission is avoiding capture by his enemies. During this period, DNE must evade the traps and nests laid by his mother and escape the forest, which is riddled with various dangers. After leaping around for some time, he eventually lands back on the ground. He takes a deep breath, absorbing the air and energy of his surroundings, holding it in for a moment. Before releasing it again, once he prioritizes stealth and blends with the environment, he begins to notice hidden traps becoming visible. At this moment, he sees these thin, nearly invisible strings crisscrossing the area. He understands that all the traps will trigger the instant he touches these strings. It's a simple mechanism, but that's precisely what makes it the most effective. Risky, yet luckily for him, this seems simple to handle. The rat-like creatures swiftly emerge in the clearing. Upon spotting DNE, they instantly attack without hesitation. Unexpectedly, it's an entire pack, and their presence here is surprising. More alarming is the fact that the entire pack is now charging straight toward him. At an alarming speed, the rats approach the strings, setting off the traps. He must act swiftly, yet hesitates, fearing accidental contact with the traps could be even riskier. However, there's no time to delay. He needs to escape. He dashes away just as the traps activate, and sharp needles shoot in every direction, ensnaring the rats. Those unfortunate rats that fell into the trap seem to have been lured as part of his plan all along. He's relieved they took the bait, sparing him the effort of handling them directly. However, he notices one rat still alive. Closing the gap, the monster lunges at it. Meanwhile, Dan continues to confront the remaining threat head-on. The beast grappled with the vermin's speed, nearly matching his own. The overgrown rat halted abruptly and turned for another strike. This time, it unleashed its long-range weapon, spewing a strange substance from its mouth. DNE swiftly evaluated the situation as the substance closed in. Though unsure of its nature, he sensed its danger. Reacting quickly, he spun his spear in defense. The young man effectively countered the attack, clenching his teeth, aware he couldn't spare more time battling the hefty rat. Defending would only drain precious moments, so he decided to shift the momentum and strike. A blue aura began to envelop his body as he focused intently on his target. With a rapid and ruthless sequence of moves, Danaz showcased his skill. The remarkable Spearman maneuver allowed him to move effortlessly through the air while precisely tracking his foe's location. This led to Russell's head being cleanly severed in one swift motion. Without a glance at the outcome of his strike, DNE swiftly departed, resuming his mission. By sunset, he had completed the trial's final stage, utterly drained yet triumphant. Gasping for breath, he fought the urge to vomit, relieved to have finally escaped the forest's horrors. Suddenly, he sensed a fierce presence emerging from the woods, fearing his ordeal wasn't over. He quickly stood up, regretting letting his guard down to rest. Just as he prepared to face the presence, he froze. It was only his own reflection. Mother Lily had deliberately revealed her presence to gauge Danny's reaction, and he succeeded. His total time navigating the forest was 3 hours and 30 minutes, even surpassing Lily's record. She had been observing him the entire time, as a mother could never leave her child alone in such a perilous place. After all, Lily understood better than anyone just how skilled her son truly was. It truly was different from a mother's perspective. Through this trial, which DNE practically aced, Lily couldn't find a single flaw in his survival skills and adaptability. She lovingly held DNE's cheeks and remarked that he might even be scouted as an assassin given the rate of his improvement. To celebrate his successful run, Lily brought out her prized possession from the Empire. The greatest assassin, Lily, believed her dagger would suit her son better now. From this moment, Dan would possess the Kath Horn. Lily willingly handed the legendary weapon to her boy, as she no longer had use for it. The Kath Horn was forged from the enigmatic eel ore, a material capable of absorbing the properties of any object. If desired, Dana could use it to contain all the poisons in the world. Forest. By doing so, he could blend and assimilate poison for his personal use. Danny sincerely expressed gratitude to his mother for such a valuable inheritance, and vowed to treat Nighthorn with care. This also signaled the conclusion of his assassin training under his mother. Just as they were about to leave and return home, the mother-son pair heard a deep, guttural scream nearby, seemingly emanating from the forest's depths. Curious about the forest, they decided to investigate. Fast forward a few days later, inside the walls of the SRS County Annex Tower, in one of the guest rooms, a man woke up, coughing and screaming in terror. He had long, flowing white hair and a beard, appearing completely bewildered. The mysterious man struggled to regain his breath after emerging from his deep slumber. Finally, he began to look around the room. He found himself in a lavish room, puzzled about his whereabouts. The last thing he recalled was eating a mushroom in that cursed forest. The door creaked open, and DNE entered, carrying water. He cautioned the man against moving too much, as he was still undergoing detoxification. DNE explained that the old man had likely consumed a poisonous, red-nosed mushroom by mistake. Fortunately, DNE and Lily had intervened. The old man remembered spotting the red-nosed mushrooms, never imagining they could be so lethal. If Dan and Lily had arrived even slightly later, he would have been a decaying corpse by now. DNE handed him a cup of water, aware of his dehydration. The young man studied the peculiar elder closely, noticing a belt bearing a distinctive insignia. The Nixan magic tower was in the possession of the elderly man, who was clearly no ordinary individual. If it weren't for Nighthorn absorbing the poison raging within him, the old man would have perished. Now that the old man had somewhat calmed, he inquired of Dana about their location. The young man truthfully replied that they were in Srees County's Annex Tower. The old man must have lost his way in the southern region. He was poisoned by those cursed mushrooms and made his way south. Dane suggested he rest and await the Count's visit soon. The young man revealed himself as the Count's youngest son. Dane's interest sparked, recalling Arabella Sr., the prodigy sought by every magic tower. Empire DNE also stated that they discovered the old man in the forest during his training with his mother. The old man nearly choked on his water upon hearing this, as that treacherous forest had tormented him. Even as an 8-chain mage, he had lost his way, and his mana flow reversed during a spell, devastating his body. The entire forest was saturated with ancient mana. The location, and then there were those undetectable traps spread across the area. The forest belonged to the Srees house, so naturally it would be perilous for anyone not part of the family. Additionally, because of ancient magic, the flow of mana differed from that of modern mages. It was truly the worst place for a contemporary mage to be. The old man finally understood. He truly would have perished if not for DNE. He also recognized that the boy before him could be a generational talent, given his strength to train freely in such a hellish place. DNE even crafted the antidote he desperately needed to escape death. Judging by his appearance, the young man seemed to be in his teens. Yet, despite his youth, he was capable of formulating. An antidote demanding profound expertise and meticulous crafting skills left the old man in awe of the SR family's fortune. With 2 generational prodigies excelling in magic and summoning, even the youngest son appeared exceptionally formidable. Had the continent remained at war, House Sres could have swiftly risen as the most dominant noble family in Althon. The old man expressed his gratitude to DNE, acknowledging that he owed the young man his life. Though slightly taken aback by the boy's bold reply, he insisted on repaying his debts. First, he wished to properly introduce himself. It turned out the old man was Sidin Gauss, who not long ago had been the head of the Nixon Magic Tower. Sidin took pride in his name and status, encouraging DNE to inquire further. For whatever he desired, the young man simply smiled at Sidra's modest boast. He sensed this elderly mage must be among those who live without a permanent home, keeping all their possessions in a subspace. Sidin was taken aback by Dane's composure after introducing himself. Typically, people would be amazed or humbled in the presence of a Mage Tower's leader, yet the boy remained unshaken. In an attempt to regain his standing, he encouraged DNE to request anything without hesitation. The young man paused briefly, as if pondering his response. Sidin smiled, anticipating an opportunity to showcase his dependability. However, DNE merely asked for more time to consider his reward, denying Sidin the satisfaction of feeling influential with his detached demeanor. DNE headed to the door, wishing the formidable mage a quick recovery and advising him to rest further. Once the young man exited, Sidin remained seated on the bed, stunned by the boy's casual demeanor. He was the first to treat Sidin as if he were just an ordinary magician. The elderly Sidin contemplated departing after a day or two of staying. That wouldn't be the situation now. He had just discovered an intriguing kid in the south and wanted to learn more about DNE. DNE casually explained to Hermann who Sidin was, and the attendant enthusiastically noted that 8 chain mages are at the pinnacle of the hierarchy, the elite among elites. This meant a prominent figure was currently indebted to DNE. Magic towers, you see, operate as independent entities. The territories on this continent resemble sovereign nations, making Sidin an immensely influential figure. Yet it remains a mystery why the head of a magic tower was wandering the forest initially. However, this was no ordinary forest. Mages regard it as a forbidden zone, naming it the Forest of the Last Days. From the name alone, it's clear this is not a typical place. Ordinary individuals should embrace change. DNE examined the sword in his grip and instructed Hermann to procure a new one. The current blades had grown too light and short for his stature. Fortunately, they possessed an assortment of weapons from the war, spoils the Count had returned with. Tomorrow, DNE could begin training with a suitable longsword. For the moment, he would continue using the lighter one. Blade completed his training. Reflecting, he recalled the crest Duke Theron had gifted him, a voucher to forge any weapon. 7 years had passed since then. Dan reminisced about those days with fondness. If he ever visited the capital, his first destination would undoubtedly be the Duke's estate. After practice, Dan encountered his father outside. Dan believed his father had business to attend to outside the castle, but to his surprise he returned earlier. Matters outside were resolved quicker than anticipated, prompting the Count to rush back. He needed to meet the head of the magic tower, who was recuperating in one of their guest rooms. The Count hoped Sidin Gauss could assist Arabella, as she would require a skilled mentor. Dan thought similarly. He considered seeking the head of the magic tower's aid for his sister, but doubted whether the old man could manage her temperament. He'd heard Bella had punched a senior for being irritating. Regardless, Count Sres commended his son for doing the right thing and saving a life. False, he merely did what was necessary, but he still went out of his way to act in a manner many wouldn't. Not just anyone can undertake DNE, but he has truly matured into an exceptional young man. As time passes, Count Sres finds it increasingly challenging to catch even a glimpse of his daughters. Arabella has completed her extended semester and is now selecting a magic tower to join, while Claire has been appointed as an assistant professor. Such is the cost of having extraordinary children. Certainly, Claire and Arabella were remarkable in their own ways, yet the Count held even greater expectations for his only son. He often pondered how the world would respond to a man of such vast talents. The Count eagerly anticipated the day when his rival, Bout Theron, would witness DNE's remarkable growth. Though years had passed since his reincarnation as the heir of the Sres house, the thought lingered. Engaging in combat with Duke Thermia still fuels his determination. Meanwhile, he ponders how Lila is faring in the capital. Her last letter arrived perhaps a year ago. He eagerly anticipates discovering her activities when he visits the capital in a few days. Sidin, however, grumbles about growing restless from being confined to the guest room, as he hasn't fully recovered yet, according to the doctor. He was advised against venturing too far and was prohibited from using magic, as his magical reflux had not yet been purified, and the poison that had entered his body remained unneutralized. He needed to rest and recover a while longer. Sidin had little choice. It had been some time since he couldn't use magic, so this situation would offer a different pace for him. Unable to tolerate staying confined in the room all day, the man ventured out, unfamiliar with the annex. The doctor feared the elderly man might cause issues, leaving him to face the consequences. During Sidin's brief stay in the guest room, the housekeepers began circulating rumors about the old man, claiming that mages are either brilliant or mad. Several maids observed Sadin repeatedly traversing every floor of the annex before he spent hours gazing at the garden flowers. They had heard the old man was an immensely powerful mage, but all they witnessed was a seemingly deranged elderly man. Concerned for their Lady Arabella, the maids noted Sadin's fascination with something exquisitely crafted. In the estate's garden, he would never have imagined it held such remarkable magic. Dana approached the old man, having searched everywhere, only to find Sidin in the garden. Sidin wasn't fond of being confined to an unfamiliar place until his complete recovery, but everyone only wished the best for him. In any case, the area was truly a fine place to rest. As he recovered, he understood why so many nobles ventured south when the vacation season began. Dane adored the south, making it unfortunate he'd have to depart soon. Curious, Sadine inquired where the young man was headed. Dane casually replied he'd be traveling to the capital soon. Sadine presumed the boy was likely bound for the academy, as both his sisters were notable figures at that prestigious institution. Among the daughters of the S family, renowned for their extraordinary talents, Sadine's curiosity was piqued by Dane's. He channeled mana into his eyes to observe the young man personally. Within Dane's body, he discovered a surging tide of pure energy, overwhelming in its intensity. Sadine's eyes widened in astonishment. He had never encountered mana so dense. The sheer magnitude of the boy's power was unparalleled, defying even the standards of prodigies. In his age group, if magic could be likened to a stream, then Dan was a furious rapid, obliterating all obstacles in his path. Typically, such immense magic in a young body would be highly unstable, perpetually on the verge of erupting. However, this was not the case here. Dan, finally confronting the old man, reprimanded him for assessing his magic without consent, labeling it as impolite. Sidine abruptly ceased his probing, commending the young man for his observation. He apologized, conceding that he might have acted thoughtlessly. Internally, Sidine remained baffled, struggling to comprehend how Danae could harbor such immense power within him. In his many years as an archmage, the young man stood out as an extraordinary anomaly. Perplexed by the old man's reaction to what he had witnessed, Dana questioned what was troubling Sidin. Focused on the intensity and density of Danae's mana, he only now realized the boy lacked a magic circle, despite his surging mana. Forming one should have been simple. The old man's face contorted in horror as he grasped the tragedy that must have befallen the youth. Sidine peered into Dana's heart and saw 2 mana cores, an astonishing feat to develop even one. At a young age, Monor chose an unconventional path, but the old mage was furious about his decision. He believed that possessing such an immense density of mana and using it solely to wield a spear was sheer madness. Sidin considered Danae's use of mana to form cores instead of circles as blasphemous. The young man had effectively turned his back on what the archmage saw as the greatest talent he had ever encountered, leaving the old man deeply perplexed. The man's outburst occurred when he inquired if he could use both mana core and magic circles, which only fueled the old man's irritation. He clutched his head in frustration, lamenting the squandered potential. The situation left him unsure where to begin in explaining the depth of the predicament DNE had created. Sidin questioned the young man, asking if he understood why the lifespan of magic swordsmen was so brief. Since they simultaneously possess both mana core and circles, these 2 concepts constantly interfere with each other. When they clash, problems emerge. It had become an unwritten rule of sorts. The mana compressed in the core would transfer to the circle, so a circle unable to withstand the overwhelming power would shatter into pieces. DN himself had a basic understanding of this concept. Sidin was unaware things could deteriorate to this extent. His frustration grew as he witnessed exceptional talent wasted on spear training. Dana anxiously inquired whether pursuing magic without a circle was truly unattainable. Sidin clarified that while not entirely impossible, refining mana without a circle to cast spells dependent on purified magic was theoretically improbable. Moreover, many challenges would arise. I have attempted that theoretical route, but all efforts Sidin witnessed ended in failure. Still, this didn't deter DNE from trying it. Although he hadn't properly attempted it before, he felt he could cast spells without refining a magic circle. Sidin thought the boy was losing his mind, so Danae wasted no time and began. Using his existing knowledge, he reorganized a familiar magical code. After manipulating the runes and the ambient mana, the process flowed seamlessly. With the restructured magic code, he successfully produced a fire spell that packed a solid explosive force. All his doubts vanished as he made it work. Although it was just a basic single-chain spell, he achieved the casting. Casting a spell without a magic core left Sidra's mouth agape in disbelief. Logic dictated that one devoid of a magic circle couldn't possibly perform magic. In his years overseeing the Nishan Magic Tower, he had never witnessed such a phenomenon. Dana, meanwhile, kept altering the magic code, forming a mana barrier around himself. He explained that Arabella had made the discovery. His deep connection to magic made him question if that was why he could achieve the impossible with mana. While this might explain it, his actions defied all theoretical boundaries. Siding Gauss, long regarded as the pinnacle of mages, now experienced for the first time what commoners felt when facing the elites and their extraordinary abilities. He was witnessing something beyond comprehension. In the midst of a world-altering innate talent, Dan found amusement in successfully casting the spells. The old Archmage's knees shook with excitement. DN possessed unmatched affinity and purer, denser energy than anyone globally, a false, one-of-a-kind prodigy. Sidin, unable to contain himself, promptly asked DNE if he'd consider becoming his personal disciple. The elderly man tirelessly sought to persuade Danae to embrace his teachings, convinced that overlooking such a gift would harm the world. Danae grew weary of the old man's relentless persistence. When Sidin inquired if Dan knew how to wield a two-chain magic spell, the young man admitted he had no exposure to two-chain magic codes, making higher-level spells impossible. Sidin Gauss chuckled in response. He boasted that if Dan became his student, he could quickly master casting 8-chain magic spells. However, Dan Pauly still declined the invitation, testing Sidra's patience. Suddenly, Count Saras interrupted, amused by the closeness between the Archmage and his son. When questioned about their conversation, Dan candidly replied that the old man persistently tried to take him under his wing. He took him in as a disciple despite multiple refusals. At least Sidin knew how to conduct himself properly in front of the man of the house, praising DNE for his potential to become a great mage in the future. He emphasized that DNE's future was brighter than anyone could imagine, especially since he could already use chain-level magic without a circle. As a warrior, Count Sras had a rough understanding of this. It was astonishing how, by now, the Count was no longer amazed by his son's extraordinary abilities. Despite lacking fundamental knowledge of spells, the young man could cast them effortlessly. The Count commended the former head of the Magic Tower for quickly recognizing Danae's potential. Yet, talent was an understatement. Dan was a false genius, destined for remarkable success. In his quest to become an unmatched magic swordsman, hearing that phrase made Count Aaron envision his son abandoning the spear for the sword. His cheerful demeanor vanished, and the air grew tense with anger. The title of magic swordsman deeply unsettled Aaron. DNE winced, realizing Sidin had mentioned something that should never be spoken of in his father's presence, a clear misstep. Sidin persistently emphasized the potential of DNE becoming a magic swordsman, even vowing to take full responsibility and transform the young man into the Empire's strongest warrior. However, by the time he noticed the Count's shifting mood, it was too late. Count Aaron shouted vehemently that his son could not become a magic swordsman, his voice echoing loudly. Sidin countered, arguing that the sword and magic would be the ideal blend for a genius suited to both. Arkin ranted further, insisting his son wouldn't become a magic swordsman. If anything, he'd end up a magic spearman. Sidin finally understood the problem. DNE stayed as quiet as possible while his father calmed down. Poor Sidin had never encountered a family as unusual as the Ceases. You see, the act of becoming a disciple holds profound significance. Mages, particularly those of great power, traditionally nurture their successors through a practice known as inheritance. This custom has endured from ancient times to the present day, even with the widespread establishment of universal magic education. What Sidin Gauss sought was not merely a disciple, but someone far more significant. The heir to his life's work and the legacy of those before him. Considering how an 8-chain Archmage persistently urged him to accept the invitation, Dan had grown significantly confident in his talent and potential. He sensed an unfamiliar emotion stirring within him, now that he had grasped the fundamentals of magic. He recalled a gift. A few years ago, Arabella left him a crystal ball, which he could use to see his sister if he wished. Seeking Arabella's opinion on the matter might be helpful. DNE retrieved the crystal ball and channeled his mana into it, telepathically calling Arabella, who was studying in the Academy's library. When she finally recognized his voice, she responded. Arabella was taken aback and paused her actions, her face lighting up with joy as her little brother reached out as anticipated. Even she was stunned to learn that DNE had cast a one-chain spell without a magic circle. While aware of his exceptionally high mana affinity, she hadn't imagined it could reach such a level. The circle's purpose is to purify and channel energy, suggesting perhaps Dan's mana's purity was sufficient to be used directly for this experiment. Arabella decided to send a mana stone to the transmission device in Dan's room to assess the purity of his mana. It was fortunate he had Arabella assisting him with such matters at this moment. As an accomplished 6-chain mage, her support was immensely reassuring. Arabella reasoned that since Dana could already, using chain-level magic would inevitably draw significant attention at the Academy, which is the last thing he desires. However, it cannot be avoided, as talent always attracts the masses. Arabella reassured her younger brother that she would utterly destroy anyone who dared to bully him. Speaking of bullies, Dana inquired about the incident where his sister broke someone's nose, the second son of the Duke. Merely thinking about that vile bastard ignites Arabella's fury. Realizing she was taking the call in a public space, she struggled to compose herself. Nevertheless, she theorized over time that Danae's mana purity might continue to rise. It was one potential avenue they could explore. Unfortunately, their discussion was abruptly cut short, as Arabella, one of the professors, required it. They bid farewell, and she pledged to send the mentioned mana stone. The realization that DNE might be pioneering an unprecedented path had finally struck him, given the exceptional purity of his mana. He'd quipped whether a dragon's heart beat in his chest. Meanwhile, Sidine remained stuck in his recovery. He utilized a bit of mana to examine DNE, which aggravated his magic reflux, potentially extending his stay. If the young man would just accept his offer, he could inherit the most distinguished legacy among mages. He pondered how to entice the youth to join his side, especially since DNE showed no interest in learning 8-chain magic. Perhaps he should present something grander, a priceless artifact or an inheritance honed over generations. If Sidin offered his treasures up front, he risked being scammed and left with nothing. As he pondered solutions, Dane knocked on the door. Sidin wondered if the boy came to apologize or reconsider the offer. However, Dane sought the old man because he had something to share. Sidine instantly thought the young man had changed his mind about becoming a disciple, but DNE swiftly dismissed that idea. It wasn't that he lacked interest in magic. Sidine inquired if he already had a master or something similar, leading to his refusal, but that wasn't the case either. Believing he was being toyed with, Sidin asked the young man what he truly wanted to discuss. It's actually quite simple. Dane wasn't yet aware of the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. Learning from his sister would be challenging as she's far away. Ultimately, the best approach would be to study under Sidin, a literal archmage. The old man still owes him for the rescue, so refusing his request outright wouldn't be possible. Dane confessed to the old man that he doesn't want to merely follow the path of a mage. He wasn't aiming to become just a magic spearman. Instead, he aspired to be a magic spearman, assassin, and summoner. As far as Sidra knew, such an outrageous combination didn't even exist. In fact, Dane might even add swordsman to that title. The sheer absurdity of the young man's ambitions deeply frustrated Sidin. To attain such a lengthy and convoluted title, Dane had to strategize meticulously. The line and decline to become the old magic tower head's disciple. Observing the young man's resolve, Sidin recognized that DNE was firmly set on his path. An idea then struck the old mage. He stood and inquired if DNE would be interested in a letter of recommendation, given his ambition to join the academy. Such a letter from the former head could prove valuable. Nixan Magic Tower would significantly enhance his reputation. DNE considered it briefly and concluded it was a favorable offer. He accepted the letter of recommendation and, taking the opportunity, made an additional request. Sidin chuckled quietly, believing the young man had finally realized his potential. Now he could begin solidifying his influence. Displaying unmatched brilliance as the elderly man was in a generous mood, Dane inquired if he could learn the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic. It wouldn't pose a challenge for someone like Sidin, who knew the rearrangement codes for all existing 2-chain magic. After all, Dan was still young. Providing him with an academy recommendation letter and a few 2-chain magic codes was no significant task. Although not at his peak, Sidin could begin their lessons right away. Dane quietly smiled to himself, having secured a significant advantage. He reached out his hand and stated that, with all terms laid out, Sidra's debt could now be considered fully settled. The old man had admitted it himself. Since he owed Dane immense gratitude, he could request anything he desired. So, here he is, requesting what he desires. Sidin disliked being manipulated in this manner. He truly believed he was finally gaining a disciple. Dan's response to his invitation remained unchanged, a firm refusal. The old man was outwitted by a 14-year-old child. Unwilling to relent, Sidin argued that the young man had asked for 2 things when he only owed Dan for 1. The young man pleaded persistently. Initially, he rescued the unconscious old man from the forest. Subsequently, he neutralized the poison spreading through Sidin's body. He could have mentioned that he carried the unconscious old man all the way back to the annex, but he considered it an added effort. Sidin had no further arguments. He was completely and logically defeated. He marveled at how such a bold child could exist. In the world, Sidin and DNE finally arranged their lessons in the training hall. The old man had somewhat accepted that he might not secure Dana as an official disciple, but he could still curry favor with the boy in case he reconsidered later. Seedrain simply couldn't allow such talent to go to waste. The lecture began, and they would have to adapt their approach around day. Using chain-level magic without a circle, the young man had to focus intensely, as the rearrangement code for 2-chain magic was far more complex than 1-chain. Countless aspiring mages failed to reach this stage, ultimately giving up. DNE, locked in, felt grateful for having such a skilled instructor. Sidin noticed the sparkle in the boy's eyes, ensured not to go easy on DNE, as he still needed to maintain his reputation as an archmage. After all, chain codes are on a completely different level, requiring the caster to calculate mana quantities, atmospheric magic density, and the body's condition simultaneously. These factors play a crucial role, highlighting magic's intricate complexity, which is why many abandon it. Entirely, Sidin provided a complex definition, anticipating that Dana would request a simpler explanation. When he asked the young man if he needed any clarifications, Dana simply smiled and allowed him to proceed. For Don, learning not only the rearrangement of magical codes, but also unfamiliar information was enlightening. To ensure Danny truly grasped the principle, Sidin questioned him. To explore the principles of magic rearrangement based on the young man's notes, the first law is coexistence. Magical energy can exist in the physical realm alongside other mana sources. Mages harness their personal power and ambient magic to activate spells. The second law is conservation. Magical energy can accumulate sufficient quantities of a specific elemental force. The material can display various properties through preservation. Not only does Dane possess a profound grasp of magic's essence, but he also contributes his own insights. While many might consider the theory of magic dull, this was far from false for the young man. He had talent, resources, and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. How could such an ideal mage candidate emerge? The lecture continued. Sidin explained that magic codes grow exponentially more complex with each added chain. Rather than delving into theory, he opted for a demonstration. Skillfully channeling a sliver of his mana, he created a basic magic grid to illustrate a one-chain spell using the simplest principles. However, he noted that the complexity escalates significantly from 2 chains onward. With precision, he then transformed the sliver. Mana transformed into a whirl of runes and energy, revealing the rearrangement pattern for dual-chain magic. Dane intently observed the dazzling display, analyzing the complexity of the knots. Sidin skillfully manipulated his code, crafting the dual-chain fire magic, Fire Arrow. Mastery of magical codes, the old man believed, comes through repeated practice, and he sensed Dan was finally grasping it. Acknowledging the complexity of magic, he estimated that most individuals would need at least a year to progress from 1-chain to 2-chain codes, regardless of brilliance. The human mind, he noted, can only grasp a portion of the code at any given time. Sidra mentioned he'd observed Dane's progress for roughly a week, while gradually introducing the technique for mastering 2-chain codes. Dane was eager to give it a try, while Sadin saw no harm in it, anticipating the boy's inevitable failure. However, when Dane began summoning his mana from within his body to craft the first code, it felt as though Sidin was observing a false expert. The young man focused intently, using his hands to shape the pure mana swirling around him. In the end, he successfully formed the same grid that Sadin had demonstrated. The primary form of 1-chain codes relies on lines of set length and width, executed with remarkable precision. The old man was deeply impressed. Dan could have stopped there, cementing his reputation as an undeniable genius. But where's the challenge in that? He pushed further, dismantling the mana grid to gradually shape a swirling mass of mana in the air. Sedin was left astonished, witnessing a flawless replication of the rearrangement code for the 2-chain magic he demonstrated once. When asked how he did it so quickly, he simply said he copied by observing and memorizing rules and patterns. He visualized every element in his mind while crafting the magic code, and it came surprisingly easy to him. Sidin continued to be amazed every time. Once more, despite his reputation as a magical genius, it took him some time to reach 2 chains. Yet, a boy without a magic circle achieved it effortlessly in minutes, seemingly determined to shock the old man. Dan announced he would attempt the Fire Arrow spell as well. He manipulated mana and runes around his body with flawless speed, eventually rearranging the code perfectly. To summon multiple fire arrows, Sidin gazed at the flawlessly crafted projectiles, struggling to accept the sight. Witnessing the boy's abilities plunged the old man into an existential crisis. If only he had possessed Dan's talent in his youth, he would have achieved his dream of the 9 chains long ago. Dan effortlessly manipulated the fire arrows, sending them soaring in every direction. In the training hall, the old archmage struggled to regain his composure. Even DNE was astonished as everything seemed to flow effortlessly for him in one attempt. One thing was clear. The world would be in uproar upon witnessing a mage casting magic without a circle, performing miracles. Sidra understood that Dan's extraordinary talent had to be concealed before individuals with ulterior motives sought to exploit him. He still wasn't giving up on making the kid his disciple. Since Dan had grasped the first code so effortlessly, they could continue and master even more codes. Sidin considered being cautious about what to include in Dan's academy recommendation letter. At the end of the day, Dan lay in bed, reflecting on his magic lesson, firm in his resolve. To effectively master both theory and practice, he reflected on his past life, which had thrust him into a reality where learning magic was not even an option. In those dire circumstances, not knowing when he might perish in battle, finding time to study magic was an unattainable luxury. His hands were fully occupied with wielding his sword and struggling to survive in the process. Up to a certain point, magic in this life emphasized theoretical knowledge over practical spellcasting. Now, with time, resources, and innate talent, he anticipated learning far more. Combining the theory from Arabella with his natural abilities, he could achieve rapid progress with minimal guidance, especially since he was being instructed by As a former Tower Master, he eagerly anticipated the new magic he would master in the coming days. Half a month later, DNE approached his father with a request to create a magic reagent. However, lacking the necessary materials, DNE needed to venture outside the territory. His father was taken aback by his son's swift progress, but Sidin supported DNE, reassuring Count SRE of his capabilities. Dana was prepared for a reagent, having already mastered 4 rearrangement codes. Typically, geniuses took a month to learn just one code. Count Sis also recognized that magic reagents were rare. Dan had discovered their existence while reading in the family's magic library. Sidin had long accepted that the boy was simply extraordinary, even feeling delighted for Dana. He was intrigued by something as mundane as magical reagents. Eventually, the Count approved the plan, convinced it would be a valuable experience for his son. Since he was venturing out, Dan would also get to see their territory firsthand. He smiled and thanked his father for entrusting him with this journey. Dan embarked on a brief trip to the outer areas of Sraz territory, accompanied by... Even on the outskirts, the people of Sraz County still regarded Sidin and Herman with reverence and spoke of them respectfully. Dan reciprocated their warm welcome with kindness and a smile. Throughout this journey, Cedra inferred that Count Sraz must be a benevolent lord to his subjects, judging by the happiness of the people. The South truly has much to offer, including delicious snacks and excellent experiences. The pleasant weather and kind people made it a scene rarely witnessed in the capital, which is why Dan cherished this area so deeply. Their small caravan had been journeying along the outskirts for some time, aiming to reach the magical supply shop. Dan had never visited the shop before, so he asked Herman to guide them. The trio quickened their pace and soon arrived at their destination. The magic shop owner was astonished when the renowned young master, DNE, stepped into her modest store. She admired his silver hair and striking emerald eyes, and Dan expressed his gratitude. Few thieves had visited her shop recently to purchase magical items, but she had managed to survive thanks to many foreigners intrigued by magic. The shopkeeper also recognized Crane, former master of the Magic Tower. She conveyed her gratitude for his presence in her shop. The elderly man, now in high spirits, felt acknowledged at last. She invited the pair to explore her items freely and instructed them to summon her if assistance was needed. As it was Dan's inaugural visit to a magic shop, Sidin encouraged him to inspect everything to his heart's content. The old man addressed the shopkeeper with a brief glance. DNE quickly noticed numerous fascinating items on display, including potions, gems, charms, and all things magical. However, he felt a slight sense of déjà vu, which struck him as odd. Additionally, he realized that touching the wares revealed their magical reactions. He attributed this to his strong affinity and continued exploring. Suddenly, a soft ringing sound caught his attention, echoing in his ears. He sensed a strong reaction from one side of the shop. As he moved closer, the owner mentioned that the items there were merely decorative. Sidin called Danae over to examine some potion ingredients together. The old man had already selected a few raw materials. Materials like moonroot, usable in at least 50 potions, were assured by the owner to be processed to the finest quality. Meanwhile, Dan, intrigued by an odd ringing, ventured deeper into the decorations. He sensed a strange power beckoning him. Turning, he noticed a stone emitting pure mana. The source of the ringing must also have been the stone. Dane hurriedly approached it, as if his body moved on its own. Herman, noticing his young master acting strangely, rushed over with concern. His master was simply staring at a plain rock embedded in the wall as decoration. Dane wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but the stone was undeniably calling to him. He took it. He pulled the stone from the wall, holding it cautiously, suspecting that infusing it with more magic intensified its reaction. Perhaps the object responded uniquely to his power. Meanwhile, old Sidin continued gathering raw ingredients. Don approached the store owner, inquiring about the stone he had just extracted. As the owner had previously mentioned, the wall was merely decorative. However, what kind of decoration triggers a magical reaction stronger than anything else in the shop? Sidin questioned whether the owner had been deceived with the rock or something similar. She confessed that years ago a peddler had given her a large package as payment. When she eagerly opened it, she found the plain stone inside, which she kept. To Hope, a mage was asked to evaluate the stone, but it was confirmed to be merely an ordinary rock. However, based on Danae's interaction with the object, it was evident that it was not a normal rock. The owner encouraged the young master to focus on her other products and a few unique magical artifacts, rather than wasting time on the rock. She attempted to sell him numerous valuable and diverse magical items. Yet Dan remained captivated by the peculiar stone in his grasp. It was all he desired. She presented him with a name scroll card, a device that autonomously reads and archives various details for eventual cataloging. In the end, Dan purchased both the scroll card and the seemingly worthless stone, certain it wasn't something he could simply abandon. Even Sidine was baffled by the unfolding events. During the return journey, the old woman curiously inquired if DNE had an interest in decorative art, or if he genuinely believed the stone held something unique. When DNE explained that the slab responded to his magic, Sidine remained open-minded. Though he saw nothing extraordinary, his curiosity was undoubtedly piqued, especially since the place was crowded. The small caravan swiftly returned to the castle. Sidin had created a unique experimental tool to assist Dan in uncovering the false nature of the stone. Though confident in his ability to assess it accurately, a mage had already examined it and deemed it unremarkable. Sidin arrogantly claimed that no mage appraiser surpassed his device, into which he had invested all his resources. This cutting-edge device for evaluations instilled confidence in its ability to analyze anything placed upon it. Both were eager to uncover the mystery of the seemingly ordinary stone slab. Sidin positioned the object on the platform and instructed Dan to infuse his magic into the slab to provoke a reaction. When Dan complied, the stone instantly began emitting a radiant glow. An intensely concentrated surge of magical energy illuminated the center of the appraisal device, its brilliance swirling and shaping intricate patterns. Sidin attentively observed the burst of light, his focus fixed on the stone slab. Witnessing his tool successfully unveil the stone's hidden secrets, Sidin felt a renewed sense of pride. After enduring repeated humiliations at the hands of the child, he could finally hold his head high once more. The mana emanating from the slab swirled through the room, shaping runes in the air. DNE instantly recognized what he was witnessing, having studied such phenomena with S-Rain for weeks. Within the stone lay a magical code, but the old bat insisted it was no ordinary one. It was extraordinary. Floating around them was a code whose structure, arrangement, and complexity were unparalleled. Previously unseen, it could be as intricate as a 6 or even 7-chain code. The magic stone contained a hidden code, and Danae's magic appeared to hold the key to unlocking it. The stone only responded to his mana. While they had succeeded in extracting the code, deciphering its meaning and understanding why it solely reacted to Danae's magic presented an entirely different challenge. Even Sidin, who was proficient in the magical arts, he was unfamiliar with this specific form of magic. However, his pride as a mage drove him to decipher its secrets. If successful, they might uncover what made Dan's magic so distinct. While Dan and Sidra labored to decode the magic at the SR's training grounds, Arabella was engrossed in her own research in her private academy laboratory. Her lab was organized with neatly placed books and artifacts from her diverse studies. Arabella had preserved her younger brother's mana signature in a magic stone, confirming that there was something unusual about Danae's power. His magic exhibited a unique trait, unlike any known form of magic. She conducted numerous experiments and meticulously examined endless research materials. Despite her efforts, she couldn't determine which magical field the anomaly belonged to. She had tried everything: magic reagents, magic gates, magic engineering, but nothing provided an answer. Yet, she remained certain the truth was out there, concealed somewhere. Suddenly, she recalled hearing about a long-lost field of magic, one that had emerged from the magical world itself. Dana's magic was tied to this forgotten realm. Arabella started sifting through her piles of books and writings, attempting to recall where she had kept that old tea. It was a book covering alchemy, divination, spiritualism, necromancy, and a rudimentary form of magical code. As she eagerly searched, another dusty tome tumbled from the shelves. She picked it up, observing it closely. It was an ancient magic book. Reflecting on it, she had once studied the long-lost magical kingdom of Arcana, a civilization believed to have existed over 2,000 years ago, and to have inherited ancient magic from an earlier era. It was said to have practiced forms of magic that no longer existed. Arabella chuckled to herself, dismissing the thought. Ancient magic had vanished long ago. Such things were no longer possible. It's unclear how Dan's magic could link to such an ancient relic, but with nothing to lose, Arabella opted for an unconventional approach. She placed the magic crystal, infused with Dan's mana, into her enchanted typewriter and consulted an old tome of magic. After moments of focus, Arabella opened her eyes in astonishment. The crystal was responding. Without hesitation, she began to write. Examining the mana's properties, Arabella's thoughts raced, questioning if Danae's magic might relate to alchemy, divination, or something entirely unknown. She was open to any outcome, so long as it didn't steer her brother toward necromancy. After analyzing the results, she felt as if struck by lightning, uttering only, "What in the world are these?" At SAR's training ground, Dana and Sidine continued their efforts to provoke a reaction from the stone. After some time, Sidine managed to break the seal on the slab. Inside, they discovered something unexpected. The elderly man cautiously reached in and retrieved the object, a plain silver bracelet radiating intense magical energy. To an untrained eye, it appeared to be a common bracelet, the kind you might stumble upon in any marketplace. Sidin initially wondered if the bracelet's material held any unique qualities, but it seemed ordinary. The stone only reacted to Dan's mana, so Sidin assumed the bracelet would follow suit. He slid it onto his wrist where it hung loosely at first, appearing oversized for him, yet the bracelet reacted, illuminating and resonating with Dane's innate magic. As anticipated, it responded solely to him. DNE began to notice peculiar symbols emerging faintly from the bracelet, glowing subtly. Sidin leaned closer to examine, while Dane anxiously inquired if the old mage could interpret the characters. To Dan's astonishment, Sidra's expression lit with a broad smile. The characters were ancient runes, undecipherable to anyone in the modern world. By ancient, Sidin referred to the language of the long-lost Arcana kingdom. Dane had only a vague understanding of Arcana, gleaned from Arabella's childhood tales. She had depicted it as an era where magic governed every facet of existence, until it vanished abruptly and mysteriously, marking the end of that age. Magical prosperity had vanished, leaving behind only a handful of relics and tales. Now, this peculiar line of magical code, encased within a stone, had become part of the ancient mystery. Sidra was aware that Dan's magic was unique, but he never suspected its connection to the ancient Arcana kingdom. This discovery deepened Sid's resolve to make Dan his apprentice. After all, the forest held secrets that only they could unravel. The final days, which had even eluded Sidin, were rumored to carry traces of Arcana's chaotic magic. Dane's link to this ancient force now became clear. Sadly, all they possessed were those cryptic runes. Sidin advised Dan to proceed cautiously, urging him to delve deeper into the enigma while keeping it concealed. Suddenly, their moment was interrupted. The tranquil study was abruptly disrupted by a terrifying sound that echoed through Sra's territory, causing their eyes to widen in alarm. Something horrifying was approaching. The familiar sound of the alarm caught them off guard, and it didn't take the old man long to realize it must signal a monster attack. That alone was enough to ignite his determination, especially now that his body was nearly recovered. He's eager to test his strength and get moving again, seeing it as a perfect opportunity to repay the Srees for their kindness. The enthusiastic old man urges DNE to grab a spear or something, instead of just standing there. However, Dan remains motionless, expressionless, and silently reaches into his coat, retrieving a pendant instead. He raises an eyebrow, inquiring about the object he's holding and why the monster alarm is sounding from it. DNE then explains to the excited old man that the noise has nothing to do with monsters. It actually signals that his eldest sister is trying to reach him. The old man's enthusiasm deflates like a balloon as the truth dawns on him, and he grumbles at DNE for not clarifying it earlier. Dane merely chuckles awkwardly, reminding the old man that it's obvious monsters wouldn't be in this area. With that settled, Danny decides to answer his sister's call. Meanwhile, the old man stands by, visibly disappointed. As Danny connects, his sister instantly questions why he took so long to respond. He simply apologizes and inquires. When asked why she called, she begins to share intriguing details about his magic code, but abruptly stops, asking if someone is with him. Just mentioning the magic code makes DNE realize she has discovered that his magic is ancient. The old man, overhearing, lets out a shocked scream, demanding to know how. In the world, she discovered this as they continued talking. He also shared his side of the story, explaining that while he and Sidin were examining some stones, they realized his magic originated from the ancient magic kingdom. This became clear because the stone only reacted to his magic, which was a definitive clue. On the other hand, the old man clenched his teeth in sheer frustration, acknowledging the fact that he realized this solely through analyzing his magic, which is astonishing. He knew she was a genius, but her talent appeared even greater than he had imagined. Arabella then asks her brother if anyone else is aware of his secret. Dane swiftly replies, no. She sighs in relief and instructs Dane and Sidin to keep it hidden, as revealing his secret would lead to consequences he couldn't manage. He then apologizes to Cedra for not introducing her first, before jumping into the conversation. The old man simply laughs it off, mentioning he already knows much about her from DNE. As for keeping Dan's magic a secret, he reassures her that he won't let anyone find out. If this information were to leak, not only would Dan face trouble, but the entire House Cerise would be dragged into a massive scandal. In the aftermath, Arabella commends the old man for quickly grasping the situation, as expected of someone wise. He then inquires if their exchange is being recorded, to which she responds negatively, explaining that the conversation will be deleted immediately once it concludes. This is reassuring, as they need not worry about any potential leaks. The old man then discloses his intention to return to the Magic Tower to investigate the matter. Arabella expresses her gratitude, but he downplays it, emphasizing that, as a mage, he is merely fulfilling his duty and she need not feel indebted. Mentioning the Magic Tower, he adds that he heard she was seeking a tower to join and inquires if she has found one. Arabella swiftly discerns his suggestion to join his tower and deftly avoids the question, stating she isn't considering the Nixon Magic Tower as it doesn't align with her desired specialization. This response, unsurprisingly, irritates the old man once more. He had already been pondering the source of Dan's sharpness, and now it seems he inherited it from his sister, yet he doesn't express his frustration. Instead, he simply laughs it off, remarking that she doesn't have to join their magic tower after all. Meanwhile, DNE feels somewhat uneasy watching this old man, especially since his sister had been so blunt with her words. Regardless, she decides to end the conversation by telling him they can discuss it. After exchanging greetings, she abruptly ends the call. Sidin remarks on how his sister has grown into an impressive individual, a sentiment Dane echoes, noting that the artifact before them was also her creation. He adds that this sleek crystal ball is highly popular among young mages. The old man smiles, acknowledging its impressiveness, though a hint of frustration is evident. As he claims he doesn't need such an item, his expression reveals that by the 8th chain, wasting time conversing with others isn't something mages do. Dane understands the old man's reasoning. His refusal of a trendy item like that subtly suggests he has no friends. Later, Dane reveals everything to his parents about the ancient magic. Dan's mother appears visibly worried upon hearing this, but his father reassures them that anyone who targets Dan will face consequences. His mother agrees, stating she won't hesitate when it comes to her son's safety. Once again, Dan feels slightly uneasy about their strong protective instincts, though he acknowledges there's no safer place than under their care. Cerise, too, listens quietly. It suggests that if Dan's statement is accurate, does it imply their lineage harbors dormant ancient magic? His wife agrees and also questions whether any of their ancestors possessed it. She resolves to investigate her side of the family first. The issue is fascinating, and Dane can't help but ponder what might be uncovered if both family lines explore this possibility. It doesn't truly matter to him, yet it still sparks his curiosity. His mother reminds him that he has already exceeded his limits in many ways. If he stays here, it could hinder his growth, so he should consider gradually heading to the capital. The mention of the capital surprises him, and his parents add that he must be at least 14 years old. Enter the academy now that he's reached this age. He shouldn't waste any more time. SRE makes it clear that he wanted to keep Dan for another year or two before sending him off, but it seems there's nothing left for him to learn here. His mother places her hand reassuringly over his and tells him he can leave whenever he wants, stressing that the decision is entirely his to make. Dana. He is taken aback, as he hadn't anticipated them accepting so readily that he must depart. His father is certain his son will bring him honor and urges him to pursue his passions fully. Smiling, he acknowledges their words, assuring them he will ready himself for the journey ahead. The Academy family of 3 smiles as the decision is finalized. By now, Dan is also excited to finally transition to the next stage of his life. Later, Dan informs Drain about his decision to leave the mansion. The old man asks if this is truly his choice to depart, and Dana confirms it, though he admits it's a bit earlier than he had originally planned. The old man then He expresses his backing for Dane's decision, stating that limiting his talent here would squander his potential. He also advises Dan not to reveal all his abilities at once to others. While the Academy welcomes talent, not everyone shares this mindset, and some may feel envious. Dane, however, is already aware of this. Arabella had cautioned him, recounting some extreme situations she had faced personally. The old man added that it's challenging for average individuals to succeed in the Academy due to its atmosphere, but assured DNE that House Thermion was an exception. Mentioning House Thermion, Danny immediately recalled Lila and the promise he had made to visit her once he reached the capital. He is aware that failing to visit her would deeply disappoint him. He also remembers the crest Duke Theron gave him, and decides to consider the type of weapon he desires before going there. The old man reminds him that 3 months remain until he joins the Academy, so he should prepare to leave in 2 months. Don acknowledges this and turns the question back to the old man. Regarding his own plans, Sidine mentions that he intends to return to the Magic Tower, as there is something he needs to address. He expresses his gratitude to DNE for helping him overcome his boredom and, as a gesture of goodwill, offers to inform DNE about any clues related to the ancient magic. DNE is deeply appreciative of this offer, and the old man indicates his acknowledgement. Given that DNE has only a short time remaining, the lesson should be his primary focus. Sidin aims to expedite the process to complete the lessons before the deadline, but he cautions Dane that the 3rd chain is significantly more challenging than the 2nd. Dane pledges to study diligently to achieve that level. He then mentions that he has prepared a gift for the old man, Sidin. He perks up, visibly intrigued by what the gift could be. Dane promptly retrieves a box, explaining to the old man that he received it yesterday from his sister using teleportation magic. He mentions that it's currently a very popular item among the youth, and this specific model is a new, compact crystal ball that hasn't been released yet. He adds that Arabella was the one who developed this innovative product. He pulled some strings to secure it as a favor. The old man swiftly picks up the stone, visibly thrilled to have it for himself. He admires its beauty, claiming he doesn't need such a thing, yet he graciously accepts the gift DNE prepared. Despite his denials, the expression on his face reveals his false feelings. He's incredibly excited to have this product for himself, DNE. He then spends time explaining to the old man how to use the crystal, much like a teenager teaching their grandmother. As night descends and he returns to his room, he reflects on the many tasks he must complete in the remaining 2 months. He reveals that his primary focus is on summoning, leading him to decide to make something. His aim is to formally enroll in summoning classes, obtain a summoning sign, and qualify for the exam. As CLA is an assistant professor, he hopes to see her frequently during his attendance. Recalling summoning, he almost forgot to infuse magic into his familiar, so he quickly takes the egg and transfers some of his energy. For 7 consecutive years, DNE has meticulously infused magic into the egg every morning and night, yet there's still no sign of a response. However, since the magic he channels isn't dissipating but is instead being absorbed by the familiar, he remains confident that the egg will eventually hatch. The scene then shifts to the academy, where students are discussing the enrollment exams, which consist of 2 tests. One is a general exam, while the other is a specialization exam. The general exam serves as a preparatory assessment, emphasizing knowledge of the Empire's culture, history, and related topics. However, DNE is expected to handle it without difficulty. Arabella explains the details to her brother via the crystal and emphasizes the importance of performing well on this exam, as it will have a significant impact on his standing. After his ad score, there's the specialization exam. As the name implies, he must choose a major and take a test, with the content determined by the professor. Arabella is confident this part will also be easy for him. Dan recalls that Arabella passed it effortlessly, and she smiles, saying, "Yep, it was a piece of cake for me." She then reveals that once he selects a major he can't alter, so he must choose wisely from the outset. She expresses her deep appreciation if he were to pick magic. As Dan swings his sword on the training grounds, he can't help but flash an awkward smile at her persistent efforts to convince him to join the magic program. To gently dismiss her, he replies that he'll consider it. He then inquires if there's truly no other way to switch his major after enrolling, as she had mentioned. Arabella clarifies that this is typically the process. The only real option is to graduate and return later. However, he can still take courses from other majors, though by his 3rd year, upper-level classes for a different major are usually restricted to non-majors. In short, he's essentially locked into his current path. One chance to choose a major. She explains that for someone as skilled as him, there's an independent major system. Donnie is intrigued and asks how it differs from standard majors. His sister casually mentions that unless he plans to fail, she'd recommend against applying, as no one has ever passed that exam so far, but it seems Dana has already set his sights on it, and the brief pause he takes hints to his sister that he's contemplating something bold. However, he quickly reassures her he won't act recklessly and decides to contact her later. After the call ends, Arabella wonders if she's being too insistent about him joining the magic program, yet she remains convinced it's the best choice. At that moment, a student approaches her to relay that the professor is searching for her. Later, it's revealed that Sadine has written a recommendation letter for Danny, as promised. Dan is genuinely pleased to see that Sadine followed through. The old man takes pride in his effort, explaining to Dan that he put extra thought and care into crafting the letter, not merely writing it hastily. Instead of using the usual generic phrases, he ensured the text appeared striking, with words that genuinely captured Dan's strength and potential for Sidon. It was a heartfelt attempt to support DNE, a gesture he doesn't often extend to such a degree. He advised DNE to consider it an honor. DNE swiftly smiled and vowed to strive to meet his expectations. But the old man, he mutters with slight irritation, expressing how much better it would have been if Danae had agreed to become his disciple. He notes that their current relationship is technically that of a master and disciple, but he doubts Dana will ever truly recognize him as a real master. Indeed, the old man might have a valid point, as Dan's awkward smile reveals his clear reluctance to even consider him in that manner. The old man inquires if Danae has completed his preparations, to which Danae replies there's little he needs to bring, as the academy dormitories provide all necessities. Sidon acknowledges the excellent facilities, but notes that only a privileged few have exclusive access to them. And with that, he concludes, there's no chance Dana would lose to those arrogant nobles. DNE awkwardly laughs, having heard the academy has turned into a gathering spot for noble thugs. C warns him to remember one thing. That place is where many kids will bare their fangs if they feel he's looking down on them. Danae reflects on this and realizes it's just like the law of the battlefield is a realm he knows well. He promises the old man he'll remember that. Sidine then grants him permission to reach out whenever needed. Now that he possesses the compact crystal, he should utilize it wisely. Hearing this, Dana realizes Sidine is likely leaving soon, a fact the old man swiftly confirms. He's visibly taken aback by Dan's perceptiveness. He suggests that DNE might find it troublesome to stay here, as his father has offered him a role as a mage advisor. However, that's something to consider later when there's truly nothing else to do. Sidine believes DNE will understand his situation, especially with the many tasks awaiting him in the magic tower. It doesn't take long for Danae to... He realizes the man must be referring to researching ancient magic. The old man thanks DNE, and the boy reciprocates, expressing gratitude for the time the old fellow has invested in someone like him. They exchange smiles, eagerly anticipating their next meeting. The old man is excited to witness how much Danae will grow in the future. With that, he begins to walk away, saying, Dane decided not to come out to bid him farewell, as it might feel slightly awkward. DNE wished him a safe journey, but couldn't shake a sense of sadness inside, having grown quite attached to the old man. The following day, Dane's father asked if he planned to leave now that Sidin had departed safely. DNE confirmed he had completed all his preparations. His father then remarked to his wife that, with their son also leaving, the castle will feel quite empty. However, his wife quickly reassures him not to be too sad. On the contrary, she feels relieved that Danae is finally setting off. Her primary concern is that she doesn't want him to face any difficulties on his way to the academy. Her husband assures her that since Dan will be using the teleportation gate arranged by Arabella, there is nothing to worry about. Nothing should go wrong. The doting mother smiles, acknowledging she's just worrying over nothing after all. In any case, she feels truly proud of herself for raising their children well, especially compared to other households where kids are busy fighting over succession. The father remarks that the day will come for their house too, and they'll have to make a decision. He believes that regardless of which sibling steps forward, any of them would be suitable for succession at that moment. DNE enters the room and is warmly greeted by his parents. His father inquires if he's ready to depart, while his mother asks if he's bringing Nighorn and the mark she gave him. Danny responds with a bright smile, assuring them that he has both. His mother then, she reminds him to bring the mark to the location she mentioned and present it to them whenever he feels he needs assistance to escape trouble. Danae acknowledges this, stating he'll keep it in mind, though he's curious about who these people are, speculating if they're her former colleagues or friends. His mother confirms they are indeed some of her closest colleagues. She adds that it's been a long time since she last saw them, but she's certain they'd gladly help. As Count Sross overhears the mother-son conversation, his face tightens, resembling someone suffering severe discomfort. He fears that if Dan heeds his mother's counsel, he might fully embrace the assassin's path. Thus, he promptly intervenes, speaking up to dissuade him. He instructs his son to locate Duke Theron immediately upon arriving in the capital, as the Duke will assist him until he enrolls in the academy. At this, Dane's doting mother begins to weep, saddened by how her son has grown and is now departing. Her husband gently reassures her that tears are unnecessary and encourages her to send him off with smiles and well wishes instead. Meanwhile, Dane quietly slips away. Despite his intention to depart, he had always harbored hesitation, yet the moment had finally arrived to embark. Herman accompanied him to the teleportation gate, while his father observed from a window. Meanwhile, a mysterious figure, acting under Count Sross' orders, was seen at work. The Count instructed his subordinate, Gilad, to discreetly follow Danny and ensure his safe arrival at the teleportation gate, acknowledges the command and begins to move. Meanwhile, in another castle chamber, Dan's mother summons her familiar, Shadow, as anticipated. She issues the same directive as SRA gave to his man, to ensure Dan's safe teleportation. Shadow accepts the order and promptly departs. Upon Dan's arrival at the portal site, Herman is astonished by the enormous machine. For the first time, Dan acknowledges the immense scale and magnificence of it. The butler remarks on Lady Arabella's remarkable character, and Dan agrees, noting he understands why it took her a full year to accomplish this. Excitedly, the butler asks if simply stepping onto the platform will trigger the teleportation. Danae confirms with a yes, marveling at the immense effort invested. She must have invested significant effort, as teleportation magic differs from other types, demanding precise code arrangement and continuous magic infusion during the process before casting is achievable. The gate Arabella installed is an ideal device where all teleportation conditions are fulfilled. Herman then wishes him luck. He is reminded to take care of himself. DNE reciprocates the sentiment and heads toward the portal. Upon stepping inside, he channels magic into the gate to activate it, as his sister advised. As he does so, the gate opens, and a surge of arcane blue energy envelops him, initiating the teleportation. The scene shifts to a lively street, filled with people going about their day. Amidst the bustling scene of their lives, we observe our young protagonist on his horse. A broad grin lights up his face as he recognizes the entrance to the capital city, Artinia. While navigating through the crowd, an unfamiliar voice calls out to him, announcing that he has been waiting for him. The man standing before him appears to be a knight, who swiftly introduces himself as Luck Asmar, the captain. The sight of the first corps of knights from House Theran, with their captain personally stepping forward to welcome him, was somewhat overwhelming for DNE. He had never anticipated such an occurrence. The knight declared that he and his entourage would accompany DNE from that moment onward. In an instant, the captain turned and commanded his knights to secure the path, to which the soldiers promptly complied. Without hesitation, they proceed. Danae is relieved to be under Asmar's protection, while the knight feels privileged to accompany him. Danae begins to sense an unusual feeling in his chest, never imagining he would step into the heart of the Aeon Empire, a realm he once despised. Now he stands as its most promising figure. As they venture further into the town, Dan overhears peddlers attempting to sell their goods. He observes the goods, genuinely surprised to find this place has everything he didn't anticipate. He hadn't expected the capital to be so lively. The knight then mentions they're passing through House Thurman's estate, which immediately catches Danny's attention. Looking ahead, he's utterly amazed by the grandeur of the place. Yet, he can't shake a lingering unease, as if something feels off, like someone is watching. Observing him, he begins to question if he's imagining things as Danae nears the entrance. The household servants greet him warmly, inviting him inside, which leaves him utterly amazed. They stand in an impeccable line, their manners and dedication to their roles flawless and effortless, a stark contrast to what he's accustomed to in the southern region. Finally, Dan comes face to face with him. Duke Thuron promptly greets the head of the household and kneels to show respect. Theron warmly accepts his greeting and invites him inside, eager to hear about his exhausting journey. Once indoors, Theron remarks on how much Dan has changed since their last meeting 5 years ago. He is certain that even children a year or two older than Dan wouldn't have grown as much. Compared to Riz and Aura, he possesses, and he is certain Count Cerise must be a proud father. He further mentions that while this place may not match Count Sass Castle's, he advises DNE to enjoy his stay until the Academy's entrance exam. He also promises to assign a servant to DNE who will fulfill any desire. Danny thanks him and promptly inquires about Lila, wondering what. Theron mentions she's doing well overall, but asks if Danae has had any recent disagreements with her. Dana questions what he means, and Theron explains that whenever Dana's name comes up, Lila often seems a bit upset. Dana quickly responds that he doesn't recall any issues with Lila. Theron acknowledges this. Taking this into consideration, he attributes it to the stress she might be feeling from the entrance exam, yet he remains confident that someone like Lila will pass it effortlessly. Meanwhile, Dan ponders what could have led her to behave so oddly, speculating it might just be a phase linked to puberty. Thermon then opts to give Danae some time to rest, proposing they can reconnect later. He hints that Dan should be gentle. Dan, of course, doesn't grasp what that implies, but Theron promptly reassures him that he'll understand soon enough. Once the servant leads Day to his room, he glances around, pondering how he'll stay here for a week until the entrance exam. However, he observes that the room seems somewhat extravagant for a guest's quarters. He simply tosses his bag down, choosing to unpack before heading to the training grounds. At that moment, we catch a glimpse of Our Lady entering the room uninvited. She decides to take him to the training ground immediately. As soon as this voice reaches Dan's ears, he quickly recognizes who is behind him. Turning around, he sees Ilila, who appears. Since the last time he saw her, she has grown significantly, and her progress in certain areas is unmistakably evident. She appears irritated and questions why he took so long to arrive, clearly frustrated at having been made to wait all these days. DNE can't contain his joy upon seeing her and immediately inquires how she's been. Leah responds sharply that she's been doing exceptionally well, but before he can delve into a pleasant conversation, Ketchup has to face her anger as she's furious that he didn't send her any letters for a long time, despite his promise to do so. She questions why he didn't write her even once in recent years, or at least inform her of his arrival. DNA, appearing somewhat confused, confesses he entirely forgot to update her and apologizes for it. Naturally, Leah isn't satisfied. Unimpressed by his half-hearted apology, he attempts to justify himself by emphasizing that he at least kept his promise and showed up. He explains that he was overwhelmingly busy preparing for his trip to the capital and somewhat lost track of everything else. He begs her to let it slide just this once. Predictably, she sulks like a stubborn wife, and Dan can easily read the irritation written across her face. He looks at her face and inquires if there's anything he can do to make amends. He apologizes once more and vows to fulfill any request she makes. Lila raises an eyebrow, questioning his sincerity. Dane offers an awkward smile, choosing to comply with her wishes to ease her frustration. Eventually, he asks what he can do to make it right. She pauses briefly before responding. Dana is surprised by the sudden request, something he definitely didn't anticipate, but he agrees nonetheless. Meanwhile, Leah smirks, clearly pleased with herself, and questions whether he's certain he won't regret it, emphasizing that she's much stronger now and no longer the whiny kid who once learned to release mana from him. Dan is visibly stunned by her confidence. The newfound confidence makes him believe she has significantly matured over the past 7 years to feel so self-assured. Reflecting on her progress, he recalls her mentioning a competition win in one of her letters. Lila is surprised he remembers and clarifies she won the Daunt Cup, hosted by the royal family. As far as he remembers, it was a tournament for children under 15. He confirms this, stating the competition was intense, and if she had participated, they surely would have reached the finals together. He reassures her they can make up for it now. She then questions if he's certain about sparring, as the entrance exam is approaching, and an injury could be troublesome for him. Dan dismisses her concern, saying she doesn't need to worry. In his mind, he still wonders why they would get hurt in the first place. With that settled, she decides to hold the sparring match the next day, as it's already too late for today. When the following day arrives, they are outside, ready for the spar. She asks if he has a practice weapon, as she certainly doesn't want to hear that he's still using a bladeless one. He reminds her that it's only a light match, so using practice weapons is normal. After all, no matter how much she's trained as a warrior, she can't handle every situation. He asks what she'd do if she got hurt during sparring. She confidently reassures him not to worry, as the Empire's best healer is right here at the residence, Dane. He raises a valid point, questioning what would happen if something serious occurred before the healer could intervene. Layla hesitates briefly, struggling to formulate a response. He then tells her that if she intends to wield a blade weapon, she must be mentally prepared for it. She wonders why he's complicating matters when it's only meant to be a minor sparring session. Eventually, she gives in and agrees to proceed. She directs a servant to fetch practice weapons. As the servant retrieves them, Danae observes her, feeling genuinely pleased by her evident confidence, just as the rumors suggest. It won't be long before she attains the stature of her two older brothers, both active knights. There's even a strong possibility that House Thurman could witness its... Soon after becoming the first female head of the family, Dan begins to wonder if teaching her how to release mana marked a significant turning point in her growth. Reflecting on Laya's thoughts, it seems this is indeed false. Laya feels deeply grateful to him, as his guidance allowed her to grasp the basics of wielding magic far quicker than her peers. She has even succeeded in forming 2 Monores, a milestone she has long awaited. On this day, she wonders if DNE would feel dejected should she win. The servant finally brings the requested gear. Once Dan is armed with a practice spear, he swings it briefly to energize his muscles. Then he assumes his stance and asks if she's ready. Lila confirms and takes her position, holding a practice sword. She recalls her battle against a spear wielder in the Daunt Cup, noting it wasn't overly challenging since the spear's effectiveness wanes as distance shortens. With this in mind, she charges recklessly toward DNE to strike. Yet, before Ila's sword can reach him, DNE vanishes, leaving her attack futile. Before she could grasp his whereabouts, he had already tagged her with his spear, abruptly ending the sparring match. Startled, she turned and asked, "When did you get there?" DNE responded, reminding her to count herself lucky they were using practice weapons. If real weapons had been in play, she could have been in serious danger, Leah. She refuses to accept her defeat, convinced her sword had already struck him. DNE grants her another chance, but cautions that repeating the same approach won't succeed again, urging her to proceed with care. Layla steels herself, inwardly acknowledging that her loss stemmed from nervousness after not seeing him for so long. This time she vows not to falter. Lila notices her father standing on the balcony, observing everything unfold. DNE also spots the Duke and is surprised to see him there, realizing he came to witness the girl's potential firsthand. He understands the doting father's intentions well. After winning the Daunt Cup, the Duke must be concerned about his daughter, who has been working tirelessly. But Leah is confident this match will alleviate the Duke's concerns as he sees her false abilities. Her father's presence fuels her determination, and she is eager to prove herself by giving her all in this final spar. Day nods in acknowledgement, urging her to show him everything she's got. As the battle begins, their blows are exchanged at an astonishing speed. This time, Lila is putting in her all. Yet despite her efforts, Danae notes she still has a bit further to go, urging her to push harder. The Duke can't help but snicker, filled with pride for his daughter. He's pleased to see them evenly matched so far in this bout, but remains curious about the outcome. Suddenly, something shifts. A strange, an ominous atmosphere begins to settle, and he observes that the confident smile DNE had moments earlier has disappeared, replaced by a stern expression that makes him resemble a warrior prepared for battle. It appears Duke is experiencing PTSD, as everything about their boy feels eerily familiar to him. As their duel progresses, Leela exerts her full effort to overcome DNE. It's evident she's outmatched. Her next awkward move leaves her exposed, and DNE swiftly trips her, ensuring the fall isn't too severe. Duke Theron appears displeased to see his daughter on a losing streak. He questions his knight, Asar, about whether Laya's arrogance might diminish after this. Asar, however, believes Theron already understands the situation, so he remains silent. He believes his input is essential, and Theron concurs, stating he understands better than anyone since he noticed the signs before the Dante Cup. However, after her victory, she changed entirely. Meanwhile, the battle continues as the Duke mentions he had thought about speaking firmly to her, but decided it was better for her to figure things out on her own. Asmar also supports this perspective. Thermon questions his knight once more, asking how many mana core Dan D-Dan might possess, given his talent. The knight estimates at least 3, but Thermon immediately disagrees, suggesting it's likely 2, with a minimal chance of 3. Asmar asks the Duke to explain his reasoning. In response, Thermon advises his knight to examine the situation more closely. Laya's advantage isn't Danae's speed or Spearman's skill, it's his tactical maneuvers, something Laya has never encountered. The focus shifts to Lila, who is utterly bewildered by Dani's ability to counter every move she makes. To explain, Dani highlights that her slow and predictable movements make it effortless for him to anticipate her actions entirely. The attacks are too predictable, giving him an advantage. Meanwhile, Theron asks Asmar if he doesn't recognize the spirit of a seasoned swordsman in Dai. The knight agrees immediately, but admits he's curious about how Dai, at his age, could possess such experience. Theron confesses he's equally puzzled. He then reflects on how Lila's most significant growth occurred 7 years ago, after their returning from the Southern Inspection Tour. Meeting Dane back then deeply influenced her, and he's confident this time won't be any different. Asmar recognizes this and admits he's equally astonished by the boy. Although the young lady won the Dante Cup, she's vastly outclassed by Dane. It's evident Count Sross must have trained him rigorously. However, Duke Thermon disagrees. Instead, he believes Shrees isn't the type to train anyone harshly, and Dane doesn't seem like someone who would need such training in the first place. Asmar isn't entirely sure where the Duke is heading with this, so Thermon clarifies. This boy is no ordinary person. He's someone with overwhelming potential. Talent, a false genius, speculates that Danae likely didn't join the Dante Cup simply due to lack of interest. While Asar outwardly agrees with his senior's view, inwardly he finds it absurd. The Dante Cup is something every boy and girl in the Empire dreams of winning. Why wouldn't Dan be interested? Theon adds, reminding his knight that no one of Dan's skills are unmatched, as the Duke remarked. Observing his daughter, who collapses to her knees in exhaustion, Thermon reflects that these battles could be precisely what she needs to temper her pride. He hopes Laya recognizes her flaws from this sparring session, shedding her arrogance and focusing on self-improvement. Proficient with the sword, she will now completely outshine her brothers. Shifting to Lila's perspective, she faces a series of humiliating defeats, finally realizing that DNE isn't merely a formidable opponent. He's in an entirely different league. She always understood their talents differed, but discovering the gap between them is staggering. In a jaw-dropping moment, seeing her exhaustion, Dan decides to call it a day. It appears DNE was merely fulfilling Duke Thuran's plan, playing along to remind Lila she's not the best. As they walk, Lila is visibly irritated and snaps at him, questioning how he trained to become so skilled. Don casually responds that he simply practiced diligently. What a savage move. His indifferent response completely unsettles Lila, leaving her frustrated. She believes he's dismissing all the effort she's invested in her training, as if implying she hasn't worked as hard as him. Dan the Savage responds again, telling Lila she simply needs to work harder. With that, he decides to leave. However, Lila isn't one to retreat. She firmly asserts that she won't be defeated. Next time, DNE eagerly anticipates their next meeting, yet says little, leaving her to ponder their dynamic. To Lila, Dan is the sole person her age she genuinely admires, yet also the one she ardently strives to surpass. She aims to prove she's not merely a child awaiting instruction. However, no matter her efforts, he always appears further ahead. Out of reach, she convinces herself to wait and see, believing next time she'll succeed. Days later, we discover the Imperial Academy's entrance exam isn't just a test, it's a grand festival. Skilled individuals from across the Empire gather in the capital, accompanied by families and attendants, leading to thousands flooding the city. This year, approximately 6,000 candidates registered for the exam in the capital. The only requirement was paying the exam fee, making it accessible to all. Despite this, competition was intense, as nearly 2/3 of applicants failed to pass the initial test. With the pre-selection phase complete, around 2,000 candidates remain, now gearing up for the next stage of the challenge. At the Academy, the specialization exam was underway. The top officials convened to address the surge in applicants this year. Over 2,000 students had cleared the initial test, signaling a hectic period ahead. One inquired about the expected number of successful candidates, to which a woman replied assuredly, 200 at most. They debated the qualities of those likely to succeed. Leading the discussion was the professor. Davo, Dean of the Magic Department, is speaking with Ingrid, Dean of the Swordsmanship Department. Davo inquires about when the test results will be released, expressing his curiosity to see who secured the top rank. Someone casually remarks that the highest scorer in swordsmanship is probably the young lady from House Therian, given her victory in the Dawn Cup, a fact no one disputes. In an exceptional manner, Duke Theron has raised his children. The discussion proceeds with Delin, the sharp-eyed, bespectacled Dean of the Summoning Department, and Professor Estrade, the Dean of Swordsmanship, seated beside her. As everyone speculates about the top student, Davo remains silent. It is then that he interjects, cutting through the ongoing chatter. Addressing everyone for their bold assumptions, he produces a letter that captures all attention. When questioned, Davo reveals it's a recommendation letter from Sedin, even bearing the Nixon Magic Tower seal infused with mana. The room falls silent in shock. After all these years, Sedin has finally endorsed someone he deems worthy, leaving everyone in utter disbelief. Despite this, some argue there's no chance this individual could surpass the Dant Cup winner, Davo. Yet, Davo isn't finished. He points out that Crane, renowned for never accepting a disciple, has actually sent a recommendation letter. Moreover, the child in question is merely 14 years old and already a 3-chain mage. By now, everyone is eager to discover who this person is. Prodigy might be Davo, gradually building suspense before finally unveiling the name, Dane Sries of House Sries. The room falls into stunned silence. What makes this revelation even more astonishing is the presence of 2 existing geniuses from House Sries already enrolled in the academy, and now a third is set to join. They are certain this will undoubtedly capture everyone's attention. Eyeballs. Estrade recalls that the House of Sras is famed for its mastery in spearmanship, yet a mage's recommendation letter feels out of place. It appears Sries is on the verge of gaining renown for magic instead. Lady Ingrid echoes this sentiment, having expected him to pursue spearmanship, making this an unexpected turn. Davo, however, is thrilled to witness his progress. Join the magic department alongside his sister Arabella, who is already there. He'll be a fantastic addition, making the department even better. After all, the Imperial Academy is renowned for its magic. Suddenly, a lady rushes into the meeting to announce the test results are ready. A system window displaying the results appears, revealing that the Swordsmanship Department has admitted a new member. 1,367 students enrolled in the Magic Department, 227 in the Summoning Department, and only 152 in the Swordsmanship Department. The numbers for the Swordsmanship Department were astonishing, especially when compared to the other departments, leaving everyone in awe. Isid felt smug and pleased with the large number of candidates joining his department. He was confident that their boy must be among them as well. Every professor quickly scans the results, eager to see which department DNE has been assigned to. But to everyone's disappointment, his name is absent from all departments. An elderly man in the room inquires if there are any applicants not listed. The reporter promptly responds that there is one application for the autonomous major. The mention of the autonomous major leaves everyone glancing around in surprise. As though they've just swallowed a stone, the reporter delivers another bombshell. Apparently, Dane Sries achieved the highest score in the initial test among 6,000 applicants. Once again, the news leaves everyone stunned, with one person shrieking in disbelief at the top of their voice. Later, we meet Dane. A month has already passed since he arrived at the academy. Time has flown by, and it feels like The sparring session with Lila felt like it was just yesterday, yet they've already taken the first test and are now awaiting the results. Thankfully, the test wasn't too difficult. That's when Lila rushes over, eager to share the information on her mind. She can't wait to discover how he performed. Well, we already know he secured first place, which, unsurprisingly, comes as no shock to us. It's a major loss for Lila, Dana's rival, who can't conceal her frustration as she realizes she's been outdone yet again. Dan, however, feels deeply satisfied witnessing her face defeat once more. After all, he's resolved to humble this fiery competitor who believes she deserves to be the top student. Still seething, Lila demands to know how he studied so effectively. Dan responds calmly. He concentrated on past exam questions his sister had sent him, noting that even with that, it remained challenging, particularly the military science section. Still, DNE had an edge, especially since he had first-hand battlefield experience with military science in his past life. Leah, however, couldn't understand why 14-year-olds were being tested on war, strategy, and military politics. Dee only exacerbates her pain by casually remarking that he found it enjoyable. This provokes Lila, triggering an even more intense reaction. She glares at him, questioning if he's lost his mind. In her view, subjects like military science, arts, music, and even the history of the Drenic Empire are topics a 14-year-old should not grasp. DNE, in his typically brash manner, retorts sharply, emphasizing that this is his expertise. After all, he's learned much from surviving on the battlefield. Lila inquires about his choice for the second test, and to her astonishment, DNE reveals he selected 3. This unexpected answer catches her off guard, as it implies he applied for something specific. With each new revelation about DNE, her agitation intensifies. She insists on knowing what other talents he's concealing beyond Spearman's ship and summoning magic. Dane merely smiles, evading her question but assuring her he'll reveal it soon. Frustrated, she demands an immediate answer and questions why he chose the autonomous major, as it makes no sense to her no matter how she examines it. I just can't comprehend his decision. Dane calmly explains that he wants to study all of them. Layla quickly points out that the pass rate for the autonomous major is quite low. Dan remains unfazed and shares that he heard students in the autonomous major can take any class they desire until graduation. Additionally, they aren't required to declare a specific major and can... Lila narrows her eyes, questioning whether he truly believes people fail solely due to unawareness of those perks. She even wonders if his actions stem from a desire not to share the same department as her. Dane denies harboring such intentions, which only incites her to lash out once more. She insists on knowing how he intends to succeed. Determined to uncover his other abilities beyond spearmanship and summoning magic, her persistence and restlessness grow. Observing her, Dane briefly contemplates revealing more, though he finds her rather irritating and wishes she would talk less. The scene shifts to the academy, where professors are overheard discussing Dan. It appears all the professors were required too. Students must gather in one place to pass the autonomous major exam, which requires success in exams across 3 departments. They are confused by Dan's plan to pursue the autonomous major, which involves spearmanship, magic, and summoning. Each core and circle of study are practically opposites, making it nearly impossible to pass all 3. Professor Delano highlights this challenge. Although some individuals have succeeded in passing both tests for the autonomous major, the majority fail to pass even one. Davo concurs, emphasizing that specialization is more effective. Focus on spears if it's spearmanship, or magic if it's magic. Applying for a single major is the safer and wiser choice. It has been 200 years since the autonomous major was established, yet almost no one has ever achieved it. Back when the major was first established, the requirements were less stringent. Centuries ago, during eras of conquest, the Academy sought every bit of talent available. If someone demonstrated potential, regardless of the field, they were trained and utilized. However, that's no longer the case. Over time, the requirements have grown increasingly rigorous. Applicants now favor mastering a single skill over being average in multiple fields. One professor questions the existence of the major, given its lack of applicants or successful candidates. Davo emphasizes that it remains a prestigious symbol, reserved for the Empire's top talents. Delino, however, observes that its significance has waned, as the department has notably declined. Davo notes that the system has reached a point where it exists almost solely in name. He explains that after reviewing historical records, he found that over the past millennium, only 2 individuals have ever succeeded, one who withdrew and the other being the former emperor. Hearing this, Professor Ingrid comments that passing the autonomous major is virtually unattainable unless someone is a genuine prodigy. Delino then adds his observation. As Dan, the youngest child of the war hero Arkan Sres, doesn't come from an ordinary family, she acknowledges her curiosity about his potential. The professors also consider the possibility that Dan might simply be an arrogant punk. If they go easy on him, he might somehow succeed, but given their roles as professors, they can't afford to approach their responsibilities half-heartedly. Regardless of the situation, Davo is curious whether Dane is a punk, brimming with such confidence that he dares to challenge a symbol of the Academy. He wants to witness it firsthand. The moment has finally arrived, and we find ourselves at the second exam location. As Dane stands before the professors, he introduces himself by name and declares that he applied to the Imperial Academy's autonomous major. Professor Davo questions Dane, asking if he understands the importance of applying to the autonomous major. Dane, having done his research, confidently affirms that he is fully aware of the requirement to pass the exams for the 3 majors he has chosen. Professor Ingrid then reminds him that it's not too late to reconsider, expressing her deep respect for Count Sres, the Empire's most esteemed figure. Spearman is reluctant to witness the son of such an exceptional individual fail and return home in disgrace. Dan recognizes her concern and even appreciates it. However, he firmly asserts that he arrived with the resolve to give his utmost effort. The professors anticipated nothing less, as DNE is not one to abandon his pursuit after hearing a few discouraging words. Feeling discouraged initially, he wouldn't have applied. With this in mind, Davo explains that the exam comprises 3 tests tied to Dan's chosen majors. Failing even one results in automatic disqualification. After outlining the rules, Davo signals Professor Delino, head of the summoning department, to begin the test shortly. Standing directly before DNE, facing each other, DNE contemplates Delano's reputation. He has heard she has risen to the pinnacle among the summoners of the Althon Empire and holds the record for summoning 3 entities above the 2nd rank simultaneously. Finally, the lady speaks, clarifying that the summoning test is straightforward. DNE must impress her in any way he can through his summoning abilities. Upon hearing this, Dan is thrilled. He had anticipated the test to be a freestyle challenge without rigid form or standards. Instead of performing a flashy magic trick as she might expect, he asks if she could summon something. Her response catches her off guard, and she quickly demands to know what he's talking about. Even the professors are left bewildered. It's baffling that an applicant would request a professor to perform a summon. This also piques their curiosity about Dane's thoughts and plans, especially since he lacks a mark. Davo had assumed Dan would discuss summoning theory, but now wonders if Dan is seizing this chance to observe a real summon. Delino, however, dislikes this brat giving her orders. She is prepared to grant his request, but emphasizes that such an occurrence is rare, urging him to pay close attention. With that, the lady initiates her summoning magic. As the immense spell takes shape, the surrounding area is disrupted by the overwhelming force, scattering everything in its wake. Even the professors are left in astonishment when the beast she summons is finally revealed, a creature of legendary renown. As the mad summoner called forth Arch, a single horrifying roar from the monstrous creature was enough to make everyone doubt their life decisions. According to DNE, this entity is the fiercest among 3rd-rank summons, notorious for attacking anyone it sees besides its summoner. DNE had not anticipated encountering something of this magnitude, especially during what was supposed to be just an entrance exam. Yet, here they were, witnessing it unfold. It appears the situation is becoming more intriguing now that she has fulfilled his request. Deli Naso instructs Danae to reveal whatever he had planned. The test's spectators are equally amazed, as even among 4th-ranked creatures, Irar is notoriously ferocious. Multiple dual-class knights would struggle to defeat it. Even Professor acknowledges its strength. Ingrid is clueless about why Delino summoned such a colossal creature. Meanwhile, Dane keeps advancing toward the monster, prompting Delino to panic. She urgently warns him to back off, as getting too close will provoke the beast. Ignoring her caution, Dane moves perilously near the creature, and calmly states he's merely trying to prove something. Delino recognizes his abilities as a summoner, and though she never demanded he leap into the raging fire to prove himself, DNE confidently reaches out, assuring her there's no need for concern. With a commanding gesture and a few words directed at the beast, the once intimidating monster suddenly submits, bowing in obedience. Like a docile pet, it obeys Danae's commands, creating a breathtaking moment for all. Dana continues to stroke the fearsome creature as if it were a stray cat. Delino, the monster's owner, reacts like everyone else, stunned. Taming the vicious ear arch so easily seems impossible. That's when she suddenly notices the mana thread linked to ear arch. Though the color is faint and not a full subjugation, it completely eliminates ear arch's hostility. What they're seeing unfolds before their eyes, yet they struggle to believe it. Delino ponders if Dane analyzed the mana thread instantly as he approached Eararch, then crafted a similar thread to link it to himself, despite Dane lacking a mark. This would be the optimal approach for him as a summoner. She recognizes that this boy possesses an extraordinary talent, one that even surpasses the acclaim she once received from her teachers long ago. With such a gift, she ponders how remarkable his future could be. Finally, she steps forward and informs Dane that this is more than sufficient to evaluate his abilities. She praises him for his remarkable courage, composed judgment, and solid fundamentals before officially granting him a pass. This leaves the other two professors utterly astonished, a rare sight they seldom witness. Later that evening, when Danae returns to Duke Thurman's palace, he shares his experience with Lila. She is completely stunned to learn that the test concluded in just 20 minutes, as much as she anticipated a longer ordeal. She reluctantly admits, albeit grudgingly, that with this accomplishment, he's now the top student. However, DNE swiftly reminds her that she secured first place in the swordsmanship department, technically making her a top student as well. Naturally, Lila rejects the title for obvious reasons, leaving her to sulk in frustration. DNE attempts to lift her spirits, reminding her father even hosted a party to celebrate her success, but Lila remains overwhelmed by the immense talent gap between her and DNE. To her, DNE feels less like a rival and more like an unstoppable force of nature. Eventually, she leaves without a word. Later, DNE encounters Duke Thurian, who offers him advice. Let her be if she needs space, but DNE thinks allowing her to sulk may not be the best for her. The Duke, however, reassures him, saying there's no need to worry, as Lila will get through it with time. The Duke then shifts the conversation, asking if he has told his father about his test success, confident that Count Srees would be immensely proud to hear it. Our boy confirms the news, revealing that everyone back home was indeed very happy. The Duke smiles and reminds DNE that entering the autonomous department is no small feat. He mentions how even those at the academy were surprised by Dan's achievement. Now that the exams are over, the Duke advises him to rest and prepare for enrollment. Dan thanks the Duke for his care and guidance. Thurman raises another issue, inquiring if DNE has considered what he intends to forge. The boy responds that he is thinking about crafting a sword, though he has not fully decided. When the Duke questions his hesitation, Dan explains that his body has not yet fully matured. Additionally, he is uncertain about the type of sword he desires. He intends to proceed slowly and thoughtfully, consider his decision thoroughly before placing his order, as this is a chance he must not miss. Thameen is rather amused by this sudden turn. Just then, the butler arrives, informing the Duke that the madam wishes to see him. He departs, leaving Dana to ponder how the Duchess's condition remains unchanged, persisting for years. At that moment, Lila appears unexpectedly. She appears and mentions that, luckily, her mother's condition hasn't worsened, but there's been no improvement either. It's remained unchanged for several years now. Dan feels sympathy for her, particularly as he's never witnessed a family member so unwell. He hesitates to claim he understands Lila's feelings about it. 2 days later, we return to the academy, where the host welcomes all the Imperial's new students. The academy's headmaster, Arwald Homet, introduces himself and commends the new students for securing their place in this esteemed institution after intense competition. He expresses confidence in the Empire's bright future, asserting that each individual present is a testament to its talent. Among this year's intake, he notes the presence of several exceptionally remarkable students. This student is also exceptional among outstanding individuals, having passed the autonomous major exam. Including this newly qualified student, only 2 people have achieved this in the past century. The student in question passed the autonomous major exam by earning unanimous approval from the 3 deans of the magic spearmanship and summoning. In every department, everyone goes completely crazy when they hear that someone passed the autonomous major test, a feat they could scarcely believe. The headmaster then summons the top student, Dane Sries, to come forward. Dane strides toward the stage with undeniable confidence as the crowd erupts in excitement. They are in awe that this seemingly young and unassuming individual is the one who managed to pass the autonomous major exam. The entire crowd buzzes with chatter about it. DNE and the Sres family, including Count Sres himself, along with other family members, are present. Duke Theran, standing nearby, is deeply impressed as he praises Sres for raising such an exceptional child. He feels a sense of disappointment in himself, believing he has accomplished nothing despite raising 2 sons. His daughter is about to enter the academy, yet neither of his sons fail to appear. The eldest is away on a mission, and the second has run off. Meanwhile, Sries has everything in order with his 2 daughters. Theran can't help but feel a pang of envy as he gazes at his daughter, overcome with sorrow and regret. He laments that her mother isn't present to share this significant day. In contrast, Dane basks in the spotlight. All eyes fixed on him, Delino swiftly inquires with Dan's sister if DNE had always been on good terms with her summons from a young age. She responds promptly and affirmatively, as if the answer were obvious. Delino had anticipated this reply and is now even more convinced that DNE possesses an inherent friendliness, a trait he likely had since birth. Delino ponders the situation. Believing Dan to be an exceptional case, he surpasses most summoners even without any apparent summon. His sister then ponders aloud whether Dan's remarkable friendliness might enable him to summon beings from beyond the horizon. To grasp this query, some context is necessary. Beyond the horizon denotes another world, the source of summons in the past, and the connection to it. The world had vanished over a century ago. Delano concludes it's possible, believing summons from that world can choose their summoners, making such an achievement more attainable. Meanwhile, the principal approaches DNE, finally meeting him face to face. He hands the boy a piece of paper, expressing his high hopes for this extraordinary endeavor. The student will showcase his full potential at the academy. Dane proudly takes the paper and acknowledges it with a smile. Meanwhile, all the scattered students gather and form a line for the oath-swearing ceremony, led by the first representative. Later, we see Dane completely absorbed in his own delightful thoughts, reveling in the glow of his first significant accomplishment. He has finally succeeded. He made it into the academy after considerable time and effort, but he's determined not to waste this second chance at life. This is just the beginning, and he's ready to accomplish much more. The next scene shifts to the academy's main auditorium, where a few representatives conclude their introductory speeches about the institution. The students are then granted a brief break. Before the next scheduled activity, they are invited to grab some snacks prepared at the back and rest comfortably during the break. Lila, acting like a concerned wife, begins lecturing DNE. She warns him that with his success, many people will be watching him, some with good intentions, others with bad. She advises him to be cautious with any offers and to carefully consider his decisions as she continues. Yapping, Dane dismisses her concerns, insisting he knows how to handle himself, but Lila persists. She brings up the topic of clubs, reminding him of their significance. Danny, however, makes it clear he has no interest in any of them. By now, senior students have already begun scouting for talented freshmen, hoping to recruit them for their clubs and activities. Thinking about it, Danny recalls his older sister mentioning the numerous fun clubs at the academy. Suddenly, an enthusiastic senior calls out Danny's name, trying to recruit him for his club. In no time, a crowd gathers, all clamoring and competing, to convince him to join their clubs. The scene quickly becomes chaotic, but Lila swiftly grabs Danny. The hand clutched Danny tightly, dragging him as she sprinted to escape the chaos. Unfortunately, their path was blocked by desperate individuals eager to recruit Dan for their club. The scene erupted into pandemonium. Students shouted, promoting their clubs with fervor, while Lila ran as if her life depended on it, pulling Danny along. Despite her speed, the crowd closed in, intensifying the mayhem. Relentlessly, DNE begins chasing them. While running, he can't help but feel this situation is strangely familiar. Sure, he's accustomed to being pursued by enemy soldiers, but being chased simply for being the top student is a unique experience. The scene shifts to another area of the academy, where we meet Keyless Redfield, quietly walking and minding his own business. In the background, a group of senior students whispers among themselves, glancing toward Keyless. It's evident he has a reputation, though the nature of it is yet to be revealed. Apparently, Keyless has returned from his role as the commander of the Imperial Knights and promptly assumed a position as a professor. He is highly regarded as one of the most exceptional and remarkable professors at the institution. Although Keyless has no desire to be a role model teacher, his concerns are set to grow from this point onward, as his comfortable life is about to end. This shift comes with the arrival of a new student in the autonomous department, the first in decades. Until now, Keyless had it easy. He could casually write papers and still achieve decent results. However, from now on, he will need to prepare more diligently. In the actual classes, the focus shifts to Keyless himself, who is quietly reflecting. He feels it's about time the freshman orientation concludes. It appears he isn't pleased about someone joining the autonomous department. What bothers him most is that someone had to join while he's acting as the head of the autonomous department. Shortly after, he notices DNE standing just outside his space. In the office, he calls out to him, surprised by Dane's early arrival. Our boy doesn't forget his manners and respectfully greets his professor. Once settled, we glimpse Kel's inner thoughts. He's clearly annoyed. He worked hard to reach this position, solely to enjoy peace and quiet. Teaching students was never part of his plan, if he had wanted that. Keyless suggests that the person would have stayed the night if needed, but ultimately it was time to move on since there was no turning back. Turning to DNE, Keyless asks why he chose to apply to the autonomous department. DNE simply replies that he doesn't want to be tied to a specific field. Keyless then asks if he plans to select a particular field later, to which Danae responds. He responds positively, agreeing that he will eventually choose something, but for now he doesn't want to miss the great opportunity to study in the autonomous department. Keyless looks slightly annoyed, as it seems that if this continues, he'll be stuck teaching DNE. However, a glimmer of hope sparks in his mind when he recalls that DNE didn't take the swordsmanship test, a fact that might change the situation. The student skipping the test suggests a lack of confidence in that subject. Keyless seizes the opportunity and asks the boy if he knows anything about swordsmanship. Naturally, this catches DNE off guard, as the question is entirely unexpected, leaving him somewhat puzzled. Keyless quickly explains that he doesn't mean to offend, but given the boy's role in the autonomous department and his current position, it's a valid inquiry. Professor, he believes Dan should have some knowledge of swordsmanship. It's an odd request, and Dan can clearly sense his teacher's lack of enthusiasm about his presence. Keeping his response simple and direct, Dan admits he has no interest in swordsmanship. This is the moment Keyless has been anticipating. Without hesitation, he seizes the opportunity to address Dan. Keyless aims to assess his capabilities. As the one authorized to evaluate DNE, Keyless suspects the boy's swordsmanship is inadequate. If false, the professor could use this as a reason to expel him from the department. Determined to test Danny's skills, Keyless heads to the training grounds. Upon arrival, he directs Danny toward the assortment of swords displayed. The walls reveal an array of weapons, and Dane is instructed to select one of his choice. As he peruses the staggering assortment of blades, he marvels at the vast collection of swords. He can't help but question how such a training room exists in an institution dedicated to academics. Moreover, he wonders why there is an abundance of weaponry when the autonomous department hasn't had students in decades. After a brief pause, Dan casually selects a sword. Keyless expresses uncertainty about Dan's choice, but Dan confidently confirms his decision without hesitation. Keyless then outlines the rules. If Dan manages to land even a single touch, he succeeds. To make it fairer for his student, Keyless imposes a limitation on himself. He will not move beyond a certain point. Dana agrees to the terms without hesitation, limiting himself to no more than 2 steps during the bout. The two take their positions, facing each other to begin the round. Kelis feels a mix of relief and concern. He's relieved that Dana accepted the conditions so readily, but it's unsettling that Dana didn't hesitate at all, as if he's confident of victory once the match starts. Danny charges directly at Kelis, swinging his blade in an effort to strike his teacher. Kelis effortlessly sidesteps the attack, evading it with minimal effort. However, as he dodges, the professor can't help but observe something. Danny is fast, far faster than he anticipated. For a brief moment, Kelis begins to wonder if this boy truly has what it takes to be an autonomous student. But there's no time to linger on that thought. DNE presses forward with relentless strikes, each one sharper than the last. At one point, Kelis finds himself just inches from being hit, and the realization sends a shiver down his spine. When Danny swings again, Kelis is forced to draw his sword to block the blow. Had he hesitated even a fraction of a second, the match could have ended. It concluded right there, and not in his favor. What's even more surprising is Danny's swordsmanship. It's unconventional, almost wild, yet undeniably effective. Salis is now convinced that this boy truly knows how to wield a sword. It's evident this isn't just beginner's luck. Dane is unpredictable, and that makes him dangerous. After this swift round, Dane steps back, breathing heavily. Kelis observes him intently, and something about the boy's stance leaves him perplexed. It evokes a memory of a swordsman he once encountered on the battlefield. What baffles Kelis the most is that Dan's posture isn't the refined, textbook-perfect stance of a Knight Order soldier or a noble house swordsman. It's raw, unconventional, a product of real-world experience rather than formal training. Yet there's no time to linger. Dawn charges once more, their blades clashing again. The speed at which they exchange blows is staggering, their movements blur into silhouettes. The sound of clashing steel rings out like a wild symphony. Kelis can't believe his eyes. None of this makes sense. This was beyond anything he anticipated, even in his wildest imagination. He's a hexaclass, after all. The swordsman, among the elite, now focuses a substantial amount of mana merely to keep pace with a 14-year-old. It's both exasperating and exhilarating, a testament to Dane's potential, yet a challenge Kelis never anticipated in a routine evaluation. Despite his efforts to maintain his two-step rhythm, he even begins to falter on his feet. He vowed, each swing from DNE grows heavier, and the way their boy struggles pulls at something in his memory. It feels strangely familiar. Salis' mind recalls the battlefield where he once encountered a lone knight radiating the same fierce, relentless energy. He remembers his astonishment at witnessing such a bold warrior, one who fought with reckless abandon, displaying no clear allegiance. Coats of arms or flags, the madman wreaked havoc on the battlefield, a chaotic force everyone fought to control. As the memory fades, Kelis snaps back to the present, just in time to feel the cold touch of Dan's blade against him. He's been tagged. Dan offers a small smile at the victory, but refrains from laughter as it would be disrespectful to his teacher. Instead, he remains composed and unassuming. I believe my sword struck you as often as Kelis hates to acknowledge. A promise is a promise, he concedes, reluctantly allowing Dana to pass. Meanwhile, DNE finally relaxes. Keeping up with Kelis was no simple task. Without the handicap the professor imposed on himself, DNE is certain he wouldn't have stood a chance. Simultaneously, Kelis is equally stunned, unable to deny the sheer talent displayed. Concealed within this boy, despite his handicap, Dan should never have been capable of resisting a hexa-class professor like himself. Now he comprehends why Dan showed no anxiety about the swordsmanship test. With such extraordinary talent, it's no surprise. He turns to Dane, questioning why he didn't join the swordsmanship department instead. Danal answers plainly, stating that Kelis thought his family would be sad, but he was confused by Dane's remark, as it seemed unclear. However, upon reflection, he understood. Dana's father is a brilliant spearman, and his sisters excel in magic and summoning. It became evident why Dan applied to the three departments. He aimed to meet his family's expectations. At last, Kelis grasped the truth. It wasn't that Dana lacked confidence in swordsmanship. Rather, he simply didn't want to practice it with the evaluation looming. Once our boy obtained permission to leave, he bowed his head respectfully, thanked Kelis, and quietly exited. As the professor watched him go, a harsh reality dawned. His plan to drive the boy away and maintain his comfortable life had failed. There's no escape now as the door closes. Kelis shuts his eyes, his thoughts drifting to the past. He remembers a conversation with his companion, asking about the night ahead. His companion replied that he's arriving later. Danny then meets his second sister, who is quite surprised to hear he passed the test. From what she knows, Professor Kelis isn't the type of person who doesn't let anyone pass so easily. The professor has only attended one faculty meeting, and that was because the headmaster personally called him. He despises being disturbed and essentially does as he pleases. That's precisely why she was so concerned about her brother. She's relieved nothing happened to him. Her remark leaves Dane deep in thought. Typically, his second sister would have celebrated his triumph, but instead she simply appeared relieved that he was unharmed. This genuine concern for his safety is one of the reasons he holds her in high regard. Shortly after, his eldest sister arrives, rushing toward him as the three siblings reconnect. Whispers begin to circulate among the students, who are astonished to witness all the heirs of House Cerise gathered together. People have always found the house impressive with just Arabella and CLA, but now the youngest is proving to be just as remarkable as his sisters. Later, we meet a senior named Max, who introduces himself to DNE. He explains that he oversees all general operations for the dormitories. The dorms are divided into 3 halls, with students assigned based on their. Dant Hall, named after the first emperor, is considered the best hall, especially since Dan, the top student, passed the autonomous major exam. Max announces he'll be staying in Dant Hall and describes its impressive facilities. Restaurants, training rooms, libraries, lounges, and even magic projection rooms. He also mentions the existence of secret facilities, though D has no idea what they are. However, he refrains from pushing the matter further and simply listens as Max elaborates. The senior also mentions that while Dan doesn't need to be concerned about this, there are instances where students are required to leave Dant Hall if their academic performance declines. He adds that Arabella and Claire managed to remain in Dant Hall until their graduation, an achievement in itself, and another reason the SRA's reputation holds such significance. Max handed Dane the key to his apartment, mentioning there was a spare in case Dane ever lost it, allowing him to return for a replacement. The senior also cautioned his junior about the peculiar students in the area. They're not bad, he said, but sometimes you'll wonder what's wrong with them. Max advised Dane to observe the details himself and assured him that if any issues arose, he'd be there to help. If he has any questions, he can reach out to him via the crystal ball. With that, DNE heads to his room. As he walks, he can't help but notice the opulence of the place, yet something feels off. He senses no human presence. It's as if everyone vanished into thin air. Uneasy, he decides to extend his senses and almost immediately detects something. A faint hint of lubricating oil drifts past his nose, accompanied by the subtle creak of rotating gears. From these scant details, it becomes evident to him that this is a trap, and he's already walked right into it. Yet, instead of panicking, he simply smirks, amused by the clumsy attempt against him. The thugs behind this scheme are watching it all unfold from their vantage point. They're clueless as to why Dane has halted, prompting speculation that he might have realized he's fallen into a trap. However, the bespectacled Arnold insists it's impossible, asserting that the cards have been hunters for centuries, making them experts at setting traps. Arnold is the eldest son of the colored barony, Arnold Collard, a third-year student. A student from the shooting department expresses concern that the prank could be dangerous, but Arnold reassures his hesitant friend that he has already eliminated all risks. This is Arnold's first time participating in such a hazing, and he is excited. However, some of the group members are unsure if targeting someone from House Cerise is a wise idea. Arnold simply reminds them that everyone has gone through similar experiences. He faces extreme hazing, but he remains focused on this event, certain that Dan will be utterly overwhelmed. Priscilla Nariel, a fourth-year theology student from House Nariel, voices her concerns. As the top student and highly independent, she fears this hazing will differ from past experiences, especially since both of his sisters are exceptionally brilliant, adding to the complexity. He is an independent learner and will become an even greater genius. Some doubt whether the traps they set will work, but Arnold is confident Dane couldn't have detected them. He ensured the traps were camouflaged and lubricated to eliminate any mechanical noise. Finally, as Dane starts to move forward, these fools are filled with complete delight. The guy is aware of every trap's location. He deliberately sets off the first one. A water balloon drops, but DNE, anticipating its fall, destroys it with a mana bullet. The next trap, emitting a foul and unbearable stench, follows. Arnold is baffled, refusing to accept that Dane has uncovered all the traps, claiming it's mere coincidence. Priscilla Narrell, however, remains unconvinced. It's merely a coincidence, but Arnold reassures her that he set the simpler traps first, as a warm-up, reserving the major one for the end. He's certain Dane will fall for it. While his two friends choose to trust Arnold's traps, Priscilla remains doubtful. Just as anticipated, Dane breezes through the traps effortlessly, prepared to confront whatever lies ahead.